software. In this context, we commend the decision by the Commission to establish common European cybersecurity standard for products, especially connected objects and services that are placed on the EU market. This will be done through a Cybersecurity Resilience Act that very likely would imply an horizontal regulation for ICT products by defining a minimum set of requirements. However, we have also to mention that ransomware is a litmus test for basic cybersecurity. If we go back to the WannaCry case, some security experts say there was an attribute to negligence. In other words, there were many companies that were hit by WannaCry, but also many that were not. Why that? Because they had in practice operational some basic practices such as updating software, backup the data, use encryption. This will make the ransomware attack much more manageable. This recalls us that cybersecurity is a collective responsibility, and each stakeholder should play its own role. This today's event is focused on building cyber resilience. Cyber resilience implies better capacity to deal with a major attack. Indeed, the EU should not wait for a catastrophic event before acting to bolster EU cyber defense capability. As mentioned by Commissioner Breton, we have clearly identified the shortcoming of the current system in the EU. Too many cybersecurity players work in silos, in a fragmented way. CEPS, in 2018, put forward a report out of a task force on strengthening the EU cyber defense capabilities, in which identifying a clear EU-wide interest for greater coordination and cooperation in cyberspace was suggesting the creation of an EU cyber defense agency that, unlike ENISA, would have executive competencies and operational capabilities such as detection, technical attribution, and crisis response capabilities. Notably, this executive function will not preclude a role for member states in cyber defense, but member states will have primary but not sole responsibility for the management of their cyber defense. In this context, we are pleased that last June the Commission presented a proposal for the joint cyber unit in order to lay the first foundation for an operational crisis management capability and European solidarity at the moment the shortcoming of the current system. But we are asking to facilitate this process. Would not be helpful to have a cybersecurity czar for better coordination in the EU cybersecurity and cyber defense action? This role is not new in the governance EU institution. I'm thinking about the EU counter-terrorism coordinator. In these 2 days, we will discuss some of these issues. After the opening sessions, between today and tomorrow, we will focus our attention on 4 major issues through ad hoc panels. Today, we will look at the NIS directive is on its way. We commend the ambition of this proposal, but also mention the need to approach open issues such as the regulatory consistency on its 2 proposal with other EC legislative action, or the need to better clarify proposals like information sharing to be able to create the right incentives for this process to succeed. Core vulnerability disclosure policy. In the NISA Threat Landscape Report 2021, it is mentioned the increased usage of zero-day vulnerabilities for ransomware attacks. Unpatched vulnerabilities are a very critical issue. The need to define common CVD policies at the European level cannot be left unaddressed anymore. Tomorrow we will look at quantum computing and cybersecurity opportunities and challenges. Although the current state of research on quantum technology is still an initial stage, it is important to understand how quantum computing impact on cybersecurity will affect the digital ecosystem. Global cybersecurity governance, new norm for responsible operation. State-sponsored attacks are on the rise for cyber espionage, tasking related to COVID-19 or are driven by state strategies, geopolitical tension and armed conflict. Are the current rules for the governed cyberspace enough, or we need new rules? My fellow Europeans, The challenge ahead of us requires a all of society approach. We need government, private sector, civil society and academia to make a collective effort to raise our game. We hope with today's conference, with the work that will be promoted over the coming years, CEPS will be able to contribute to this discussion, to this collective effort, offering the Cybersecurity CEPS initiative as a platform for this endeavor. A final word for a sponsor. They've generously contributed to make this event possible and to allow our research to move forward with autonomy that is the hallmark of our think tank. Now, before giving the floor to our first keynote speaker, I would like to remind all of you some basic engagement rules for today. Please keep switched off camera and microphone. Only the panelists, when they speak, will have both camera and microphone on. Use the chat for question and comment. We will put the slide on the website. In any case, the event will be available on the CEPS YouTube channels. Now, let me give the floor to the first panel of the opening session, to the first keynote speaker, Jakob Boratinsky, Head of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Unit, DG Connect. Kuba, you have the floor.
Good morning, Lorenzo. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, and perhaps as you, I have also hoped that this would be a post-pandemic event and that we would be able actually to meet. So, I mean, to my great regret, I think we continue here, which I would say also is for us another reminder of how basically fundamentally critical for our functioning is indeed the resilience and stability of internet, of all what we basically do online. President von der Leyen in this year's State of the Union address said if everything connected, everything can be hacked. It's probably more true than ever, given, you know, indeed unprecedented degree of our reliance on digital, and that vulnerability is clearly growing. Lorenzo, you referred to a number of incidents which happened over the last year. I think in that context, you know, I indeed feel that the attack on Colonial Pipeline in the US, which in any way, you know, in many kind of categories can be considered as clearly being in the avant-garde of cybersecurity efforts. Nevertheless, you know, we have seen indeed this very damaging attack, which created, you know, a real world, very tangible impact on critical infrastructure, ultimately, you know, affecting millions of consumers. I think that basically shows the magnitude of what is the threat, and I find it also extremely interesting to see that we see also how this attack has basically triggered what I would see as a really changing approach, or even a change of paradigm of US government vis-a-vis cybersecurity. So we have seen first wave of let's say important legislative initiatives, which I would say one could see is a bit inspired or similar to what we do in Europe in relation to the NIS directive. Now, another dimension, I think, which this is something I'm pretty sure we have mentioned a year ago, this concern that the pandemic can also, you know, bring this major impact on our health infrastructure in also cyber domain. I mean, this I would say has not materialized. However, I mean, not materialized in a sort of systemic way. Nevertheless, you know, again, examples such as the one attack on the Irish Health Service executive, again, shown us the danger. And in the same way as with the attack on the Colonial Pipeline, we actually see that this type of events are really having a major and good, I would say, it's good impact on the thinking of governments and everyone. You know, this issue is indeed being treated with far more priority and urgency that was the case so far. You spoke a lot about ransomware. I think this is indeed the scourge of today. Obviously, if you look back, you know, the ransomware hasn't started last year. It has been with us for more than 10 years. But again, you know, the opportunistic approach of the cyber criminals and the sheer scale of assets and dependency on digital make, of course, ransomware Anno Domini 2021 far more menacing and impactful than what we have observed 10 years ago. But then we have also extremely worrying attacks on supply chain, and according to ENISA, these are likely to, if we make the summary, to increase fourfold this year. I mean, all of this, of course, provides a background against which the Commission has actually adopted the range of measures. I mean, starting with the cybersecurity strategy that was adopted shortly our last conference. I would say again, some would say, I mean, why so fast? Why the Commission is coming again with something on cybersecurity? But I think that was very much the context in which we operate. That indeed was for us quite essential to come up with the, let's say, fresh vision on how we can actually tackle cybersecurity challenge from different dimensions. So these three main areas of action. I would read it because in a way, each of them indeed provide for an important concept, which is, I think, essential from the point of view of tackling cybersecurity, how it should be tackled, that is in a comprehensive manner. So first of all, the first pillar is about resilience, technological sovereignty and leadership. And I'm mentioning also, I think it's important to also again realize that, of course, cybersecurity is also a part of a wider EU's effort to ensure more of our, let's say, autonomy, also decrease our dependence on technologies. I think having cybersecurity, being strong in cybersecurity in that sense is very essential. The second pillar, building operational capacity to prevent, deter, and respond. I think this is again very important for us to indeed engage in measures that we can actually work together across the silos and be ready for the possibility of really concurrent attacks which would address which would basically target important elements of infrastructure across the member states. And finally, it is very much essential to in this domain to advance global and open cyberspace. For that we need diplomatic tools, but for that we also need quite also, I would say, degree of assertiveness. So I will not go in reciting the cybersecurity strategy in this opening speech. I just want to pinpoint several areas, also echoing some of the points made by Lorenzo. I mean, one important initiative in that context is indeed Joint Cyber Unit, which we see as which first was outlined in the strategy and then followed up with the Commission recommendation adopted in June, that followed clearly on a quite long process of discussions and consultation with member states. I mean, the idea is quite bold, because what we basically intend to do is we would like to bring together four different communities, let's say resilience, NIS, civilian community, law enforcement, diplomatic, and finally cyber defense, in a way that would give us, a strong degree of preparedness, both in terms of situational awareness and basically preparedness in terms of being ready to act together in times of crisis. And finally, this is, let's say, the ultimate goal, to have a collective capability to respond to a major cyber attack. Well, this proposal, I would say, maybe if you take it in a sort of narrow way, maybe falls short of what Lorenzo has said as cybersecurity czar. But I think, being in this field for a quite long time, I would say, from my personal experience, what we actually put in front of the JCU as an ultimate objective is going really far. Cybersecurity, I don't want to really draw parallels with terrorism. There is a specific, let's say, history behind why we have a EU anti-terrorist coordinator in the council. But cybersecurity, as of course everyone in this conference is very much well aware, is a very, let's say, complex challenge and range of policies that cut across very different domains. And we have very few actually countries around the world where you would have, let's say, a person who you could say this is a cybersecurity, supremo, overseeing everything. There was a bit of that in the White House, but I personally, again, I don't think that necessarily helped to overcome the complexity and let's call it complexity of the US, let's say, institutional and legal landscape of dealing with cybersecurity, when we have a very complex plethora, of different powers at the federal and state level, divided between a multitude of agencies, etc., etc. Well, with JCU, just to close on that point, I think we have had, an interesting, debate with member states. You've seen recently council conclusions. I think, perhaps we will not be going as fast as we intend, as expressed in the Commission recommendation. But of course, for us, it is extremely important to have this effort not just as an exercise of EU institutions, but as a joint co-creation effort with member states. And with that in mind, and with the agreement of member states to work toward what we see as an overarching goal, completion of a EU cyber crisis response framework, I think we are on the right track. Going back to the strategy, I think what another, let's say, important initiatives that I would like to draw your attention to is the idea to support creation of network of security operation centers across the EU to monitor and anticipate attacks on networks. This has been presented also by Commissioner Breton as part of the so-called Cyber Shield. Again, this is not one specific panacea, but I think also with this very practical approach of actually not just having rules of the game, but also investing in cybersecurity. This is actually one of the practical ways how we want, through the Digital Europe program, to basically support member states, but also with participation of private sector capacity, to be more resilient. And again, I would say, this is of course relevant, notably in the context of ransomware. Implementation of 5G toolbox is of course also continuation of that work is of fundamental importance. Then I will not venture into this, but we are very much also, let's say, happy to see, in the strategy what comes from our colleagues from External Action Service, the ideas about how to further increase effectiveness and efficiency of cyber diplomacy toolbox, because I mean, indeed, with the increase of very menacing cyber attacks, with actually support of some state actors, it is extremely important we have a strong collective capacity to actually do the political attribution, but also come up with necessary with sanctions. We very much also welcome, so we had a council conclusions, we have a European Parliament resolution on the cybersecurity strategy, and this has been of course of a major support for us. There would be a dedicated session on NIS2, so I will not dwell much about it, in a moment. I think for us, it is indeed an extremely important, let's say, element of the whole package of the cybersecurity measures. We think that, with all the lessons learned from implementation of NIS1, with this increased dependence, I mean, I think one of the key elements of this revision is indeed a big expansion of the scope. We are fully aware that this is not entirely uncontroversial, but I think, we are at the point there is no other way than basically making sure that issues of serious cybersecurity resilience, risk management at the level of the company needs to be achieved within this sort of a model where this becomes basically part of an overall legal compliance. And this is wherever we talk to people at the level of the companies. I mean, this is basically what helped them at the end to bring the matters to the attention of the boardrooms. What also we clearly want to achieve with the NIS is to have a higher degree of harmonization. Still will not satisfy everyone, but I mean, this is the reality where we need basically to give quite a lot of flexibility, but I'm quite confident that this would be really a major step forward with NIS in comparison with NIS 1. And I think what is also in itself a very good news is that we managed to achieve general approach. As you know, the COREPER has adopted this on 24th of November. Parliament has basically also finalized its position around the same time. Why I'm saying it's a good sign, it is a good sign because in spite of all the possible, controversies, different viewpoints, I think that everyone understands that this is an area where we cannot afford basically, being engaged in kind of multi-year negotiations. And for me personally, it's also, a moment of satisfaction because I basically remember when with first NIS, it took us 3 years to get to the general approach. Now, Cyber Resilience Act, I think that was mentioned by Lorenzo. I think that was that builds on what we actually have been reflecting already for quite a long time. I mean, if you look a little bit back, I mean, we with the Cybersecurity Act proposed by the Commission 2017, we have made a first step towards basically increasing cybersecurity of products with the system of voluntary cybersecurity certification that we know, of course, very well. It takes time to implement it, but in a way, I mean, it is certainly on track. But I think the idea of including of introducing rules on cybersecurity requirements on products in the internal market, I would say is for me, first of all, a sort of a signum temporis in a sense that we reached a degree of maturity that we actually are applying a general kind of internal market philosophy to the area of cybersecurity in spite of all the challenges that it entails, and that we are like firmly leaving this period which has been often referred as kind of regulatory Wild West, for the area of ICT technology, because basically, it's too much at stake. We clearly left, the infancy period, and we need to act. So this has been, as you know, included also in the speech of President von der Leyen, where I think it is important to note, of course, cybersecurity was also mentioned by her in the wider context of the efforts that in the very increasingly difficult, let's say, geopolitical context, EU should take in the area of, broadly speaking, defense. But of course, one cannot speak today about defense without referring to cyber. But now, specifically, Cyber Resilience Act, obviously, it is indeed about building on the internal market rules. We had a first important step, a delegated act adopted under the Radio Equipment Directive that aims to improve the cybersecurity of wireless devices. But with the Cyber Resilience Act, we are indeed in a position, to have a comprehensive approach to those issues. Also, look to the whole life cycle of product and look into proper, conformity assessment methods in relation to specific risks. So the first stage of preparatory work has been done, and we are basically, I expect that early next year, there would be, let's say, further announcements by the Commission, which follows basically a normal track for legislative proposals, that is the open public consultation, inception impact assessment, call for evidence, and we really expect for a strong engagement with many of you who are also in this conference. Anyway, we are, as we speak, having also quite many discussions with the industry, and on that, I also remain, I would say, quite positive because we see a strong support actually from many member states. In that context, let me also mention the Council conclusions that have been adopted on these issues under German presidency. Well, perhaps because I think my time is slowly coming to an end. I mean, the last perhaps element that I want to tackle is the fact that we, for the first time, we really have significant funds to invest in cybersecurity at a European level. You know, with the adoption of the Digital Europe program, we can definitely, you know, step up the investment, you know, and the big, let's say, the big ticket items in the first work program for 21 and 22 is the investments under European Cyber Shield on topics such as, you know, cybersecurity resilience, cybersecurity ranges, security operations centers, securing 5G and other digital infrastructures. For that, we have 177 million. We have also over 80 million for the implementation, for the support implementation of relevant EU legislation. And, you know, another important high ticket item, which is investment in secure quantum communication infrastructure. I mean, all of this would be facilitated by another, you know, new, let's say, creature in the complex cybersecurity ecosystem, that is the competence center with its seat in Bucharest, that is basically now in the process of building up. But well, you know, the main, let's say, place would be in Bucharest. What is essential for the concept here is that we will have a network of coordinating centers across all member states, and that is for us, you know, an extremely, again, it's important for cybersecurity. How can we demonstrate that in practice we are able to bring together, pull together our resources, capacities in investment in cybersecurity? But I would say it's also a useful test overall for EU capacity, you know, to pursue, let's say, our technological sovereignty. So please, again, engage over coming periods in both, you know, the implementation of DEP and in what would be done around the center across the member states. So, I mean, all in all, I would say a lot has been happening over this year. But I mean, I would say the stakes are extremely high, and I'm sometimes wonder, you know, with all the efforts that we have made, are we still, let's say, acting fast enough? And again, I think what is perhaps a certain consolation is the fact that, you know, everyone should be aware of what can contribute, but also, you know, we are operating in a much wider context. Obviously, at the end, what is essential is the awareness and cybersecurity investment across, you know, across the whole Europe, and that includes basically thousands of companies, but at a certain level, even awareness of citizens. So what EU can do, of course, is to help, but it is, of course, as I said, a shared responsibility. So it's very good in that context that we have many also speakers from the private sector in this summit. So thanks a lot again, Lorenzo, for having the opportunity to speak, and back to you.
Okay, thanks, Kuba, for your comprehensive presentation. And before giving the floor to Raji, just, you know, there is one question in the chat for Kuba. Does the announced EU Cyber Resilience Act mean horizontal cybersecurity regulation NLF based? If you want to answer this, and then, because, you know, I will give only, you know, one question for each speaker, and then we'll go to the you know, collective discussion at the end of the after the two additional presentation. Okay, go ahead, Kuba.
Listen, well, I must say, I mean, at this stage, of course, we still have some, let's say, internal discussions inside the Commission that would eventually result, you know, in publication of inception impact assessment, call for proposals. But I would say yes, I would say there's a high likelihood that this would be, let's say, plat de résistance of this legislation. And indeed, you know, NLF, of course, is an extremely important point of reference, and yeah, so that is what I can say without being definitive, but this is, let's say, a direction of travel. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kuba. Now I will give the floor to Raji Samani, McAfee Fellow, Chief Scientist. Raji, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, good morning. So I'm going to just share my screen. So what I wanted to do today was to kind of give a practical view about who we're actually dealing with. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around how our policy needs to change to address some of the cybersecurity challenges. But I think in order to feed that policy, we need to have a strong understanding of who or what we are up against. Now, Colonial Pipeline was discussed just earlier, and what I thought I would do is actually share with you the Colonial Pipeline group and how they actually operate. Because when we talk about ransomware, there's a misconception that what we're dealing with is ransomware. And in fact, the dark side group who actually targeted Colonial Pipeline, this is actually the modus operandi of how they get inside organizations. And one of the things that you may well notice, specifically on the right-hand side, is the only time that we see malware, the only time that we see ransomware really is at the very end of the attack. In fact, what's happening today, and the reason that we're seeing such a growth in the number of cases across the globe, and really why ransomware today used to be $400 or $500. Now they're able to charge $40 to $50 million for impacted organizations, is because this is not about ransomware. This is about them getting inside organizations and then exfiltrating information. So on the right-hand side, what you'll notice is this tool called rclone. And what they'll do is they'll get inside an organization, they'll get passwords, they'll get everything that they need to be successful, and then they'll exfiltrate data, and only then will they deploy ransomware. And this is important to understand because this is the threat actor that we are dealing with today. Anybody that sits and talks to you about ransomware as a problem or malware or computer viruses really fail to grasp what we're facing today within society is we're dealing with individuals that have incredible skills in breaking into companies. Not only can they break into companies, but they can gather the credentials, they can gather all of the necessary tools that they need to find their way to put their boot on the throat of organizations and demand ransoms of millions of dollars. In fact, the average ransom demand is now six figures. I think Coveware recently reported it's about $139,000. And of course, this is the criminal organized groups. But equally, we've heard discussions about nation states. And, you know, what I thought I would do is just share with you details about the nation state threat as well. And to do so, what I'll do is I'll give you the example of Operation Harvest. Now, this was a long-term campaign that had been carried out against a security and defense contractor. And initially, when we received the call, in fact, I got the call just about a year ago today, the sense was that actually this was a new threat or a new campaign that had been carried out. When we begin to understand and unravel what we were dealing with the nation state, we realized that actually the nation state was in the environment for about 7 years. It says 2015, but the reality was when we found additional details, it was actually as far back as 2014. This is a major enterprise. This is a major defense contractor in which information had been stolen over a period of 7 years. It got so significant that actually it went up to the head of state because of the significance of what had actually been stolen. So when we talk about threat groups, when we talk about the cybersecurity challenge, we have to acknowledge the fact that we're dealing with criminal gangs with incredible capabilities. We're dealing with nation state groups who can remain undetected, and in this particular case for a period of 7 years, and steal information at will. Now, I understand that one of the challenges that we've always collectively faced is this construct of attribution. And, you know, we've thrown around terms like organized criminal gangs, we've thrown around terms like nation states. But from a policy perspective, understanding who we're up against will be absolutely critical. So what I'd like to suggest and what I'd like to propose is as we collectively, as citizens, need to start to do additional details to understand the way that threat actors are working so we can do accurate attribution, so we can hold nations and criminals to task with regards to the attacks that they are doing. In order to do that, what we need to do is move away from the historic approach of looking at traditional IOCs, indicators of compromise, and start to understand the behaviors of these particular groups. with this particular case with Operation Harvest, one of the things that we did was we actually mapped every technique of the actor. This allowed us to create a benchmark as to the tools they use, the behaviors that they undertook. So we had a really accurate view as to who was actually behind this particular attack. Not only that, but actually analyzing all of the various different assets that they were used. In this particular case, this particular threat group actually had multiple backdoors that they were using inside the environment. All of these backdoors, we have to undertake source code analysis to determine where that source code came from. And this is critical because typically speaking, when we deal with these APT groups or these nation state groups, they're not generating net new malware. Effectively, what's happening is the tools that the malware that they're developing for campaigns generally have some DNA with regards to previous campaigns they've carried out. So looking at the historic artifacts is absolutely critical. And of course, there are opportunities for us to not only do that, but actually try to understand when the threat actors were in the environment. And Operation Harvest is no different. What was remarkable about this particular case was when we spoke to the impacted organization and we said to them, look, there are threat actors inside your environment. They've been here for 6 years because that's what we believed at the time. But what we want you to do is we want you to allow the threat actors to remain in your environment. And that was a really difficult conversation because effectively we're asking an organization to knowingly allow threat actors inside the network, but we needed to do that in order to understand what else they had access to. And in doing so, we were able to observe what they were getting inside the environment and stealing information. In this particular case, and one of the things that we recognized was they were only working Monday to Friday, and generally speaking, were only inside the environment from the hours of approximately 11 o'clock in the morning and 5 p.m. in the afternoon. Actually have a very good work-life balance, I have to stress, which is more than what I can say for us on the defensive side. But what I can say, it's incredible to look at. This provides us a level of visibility that we're really very rarely afforded. And it's these types of what I would regard as critical artifacts that allow us the opportunity to be able to accurately determine who's behind a specific attack. And this is critical from a policy perspective. It's critical from a response perspective. If we're going to go out publicly, and we've talked about a cybersecurity czar, but in order to start to establish these discussions with aggressive nations or work with law enforcement in order to seek arrest, we have to look at all of the various different artifacts that we have within us in order to be able to have those discussions and in order to be able to make those declarations as to who we believe to be malicious actors. For me, as we begin to start to look at the challenges that we face, we have to move away from the bottom three pyramids because, quite frankly, this actually is easy to introduce false flag operations. So we see some nations beginning to introduce false flags to make it appear that it comes from a different nation. And this is happening more and more. And so we have to increase our methodology. We have to introduce new tools to analyze in order to hold those accountable. And of course, all of this allows us the opportunity to be able to have a degree of confidence as to who we believe to be behind specific threats. We've talked about HSE, we've talked about Colonial Pipeline, we've talked about Operation Harvest, but we need to start to hold individuals and groups accountable. And the way they begin to do that is by doing better attribution. Now, equally, the important part that I have to stress, and I know I've discussed this in the past, is actionable intelligence will be key. And so with Operation Harvest, what we need to do is understand who else and which other countries they're targeting. And what we recognized and what we realized today was this was a global campaign, not just targeted at one particular nation. So this is absolutely critical. So this drives our actionable intelligence in order to be able to provide alerts to companies in Europe or actually all across the globe to tell them this is what's happening right now and this is what you need to do to protect yourself. And all of this, I believe, has to be done in partnership with the private sector. Within the Advanced Threat Research Division, of course, as you know, we were co-founders for No More Ransom, and equally we are actively working on tracking this particular multiple threat groups You may have seen recent work that we did with law enforcement on the arrest of the ReEvil ransomware group affiliates. That was work that we done in order to support the law enforcement and the wider community, as well as ensuring that we provide the tools necessary for the community to protect themselves. With that, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity, and I do believe I kept it within 10 minutes, so thanks very much.
Okay, Raj, thank you very much for your always very informative presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to our third keynote speaker. This is a collective presentation between Jan van Hacht, Partner Risk Advisory, and Martina Calleri, Cybersecurity Specialist of Deloitte Consulting Advisory. Please, Jan.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Good morning, everyone. Indeed, I'm Jan van Hacht. I'm one of the partners in the Belgian cyber team. Just very, very honored to have the opportunity, of course, to address this audience this morning. Sharing some ideas on the state of the industry from a cybersecurity perspective, obviously, and wanting to share some opening ideas to then primarily introduce Martina, who will share some further insights, some statistics on what we actually see happening at our clients and how that is impacting also the work with the commission side. Goes without saying that COVID-19 had a massive impact, of course, on our day-to-day lives. Day-to-day lives from a private perspective, but certainly also from a professional perspective. And as we can also see with the speakers here today, we're here in our home offices. And that was a very rapid change that we all had to go through. A very rapid change, a very rapid transformation from our usual work in the offices to working from home. And that led to a big cascading effect where I don't think anyone was really prepared, at least not from a security side and not even from an IT support perspective. That whole digital transformation that we were part of had one big focus, that it really accelerated the trend that was already moving in the industry, but it really accelerated everything massively. And primarily with that acceleration, the time to market of bringing new collaboration tools, new ways of communicating, new ways of exchanging ideas, just ruled everything. Time was of the essence. Also looking at ourselves at Deloitte, we literally transformed our way of working overnight. And so within 2 days after the initial lockdown, we were in a completely different setting. Luckily, some of that preparation was already in place, but even there, we had to upskill and we had to reinvent ourselves. And we also had to assist our clients in reinventing the way they dealt with their employees, with their co-workers, but primarily with their clients and their business partners on a day-to-day life. And that focus on time obviously introduced a lot of ideas. And so a lot of trade-offs were made from the classical time, user-friendliness, and security. And goes without saying, security was not top of mind for many of those situations. So the cyber risk drastically increased. And also primarily the attack surface itself drastically increased. That was a drastic explosion there of the entry points that someone had looking at home devices, at new ways of working, at sharing of documents. And so for us, it is a key belief that we need to embed cyber transformation as part of that digital transformation wave that is going on. And even go further to also do a lot of catch-up, a lot of patchwork that we'll need to do with our clients on how that is going, and to allow, given the wide reach that we now have in that wide attack surface, again, collaboration between different parties, creating those coalitions will be key. Looking at how internet service providers are playing a role in facilitating that information exchange, on a crucial role that they are playing, but also looking at how manufacturers of smart devices, of electronic devices are working, and how everything is now intertwined. So with that, I'd like to give the word to Martina to give us some more details on how that world is looking today. Go ahead, Martina.
Martina, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, here I am.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much. Thank you, Jan, for introducing also what we are then going to present into more details today. As you already heard, our main points are really looking at the latest cybersecurity challenges brought by COVID, then giving a brief overview on the impact of EU cyber policies on companies and building resilience, and finally some opportunities. So I'll guide you through this in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll be open to receive questions from the audience. So when we look at the risks Jan already mentioned, there was a swift increase in cyber attacks during COVID. So this data is 220% increase in the EU and 45% increase in the world. This was also mentioned by the Commission. Attacks to the supply chain are really multiplying. So this is, of course, an area where we're paying particular attention to. And when we look at who are the targets, individuals really positioned higher up in the scale with a 47% increase in phishing scams. This is also true for teleconferencing data, where data breaches are increasing. So 500,000 of people were already affected by such breaches last year. And finally, something companies have already experienced for quite some years. 51% of organizations are still experiencing shortage of cybersecurity skills. So this is, of course, an area where we will need further work to develop professionals in the future. So when we look at this landscape, it's clear that risks have increased during the pandemic, and we sense that the temperature is even hotter in the boardroom of management bodies, who are really gaining an understanding and awareness of new threats related to cyber. When we look at how we can increase resilience at European level, I think a lot of initiatives were mentioned today by the European Commission that have been launched actually in this area. So we are going to start feeling the impacts within the next 3 years. So I just want to guide you briefly through the main impacts on the business of these new initiatives and how companies will feel those impacts. So the first aspect we're looking at is really the role of the board. Both NIS and DORA, NIS2, that are expected to come into force by 2024, contain principles on the responsibility of management bodies in approving cybersecurity risks. So this is an important principle, which in some cases is already happening in practice, as over 50% of organizations already have an information technology supervisor that is reporting directly to management bodies, but it's not a universally applicable situation. So in some cases, the role of IT experts is still confined in some part of the organization. Having this as a principle into legislative frameworks will allow this structure to be more universally implemented, which we see as a positive development. So of course, this will require a lot of awareness and trainings for the boards in order to overlook at monitor the cybersecurity risk that their companies are exposed to. Secondly, when we look at the scope of those frameworks, especially when we look at NIS2, this was also mentioned as a controversial point during the negotiations. The new companies and sectors are falling within the scope of upcoming frameworks. So this means a larger landscape of cybersecurity actors that, combined with new institutions that are coming into the picture, is going to create a challenge of cooperation. So when we look at these new actors, we see that it's a combination of private and public. We do have experience with all of these different organizations, and the approach to cybersecurities are always very different. So this is a challenge for cooperation, especially when we look at the new actors coming into the picture with the new European Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in Bucharest and national coordination centers. Those will work into building capacities at national level, which is a key factor in creating a resilient ecosystem. So cooperation between the critical infrastructure all together with public authorities will be fundamental at national level to build EU resilience. When we look at the initiative of the network of security and operations centers, this is also a very important development, in which the challenge really consists on the fact that those centers have very different setup at national level. So to have cooperation, to have information sharing, they will need a baseline of security and technical measures to share information. This is why we really pose and put some expectations on the joint cyber unit that together with the Cyclone network will increase our preparedness in large-scale cyber attack response. Of course, here the keyword is situational awareness. It was already mentioned today. I think it will come up during the event quite again. And it's really about gaining an holistic view on threats and vulnerabilities to enable decision-making at European level. This is why having those actors capable of sharing information and trusting each other through communities of trust will be fundamental for policies to work. Going back to the last points that I want to make before going into the Q&A, we have security measures that the new frameworks will bring into the picture. Why this is new is because NIS already set some security measures and requirements, which led to 5% budget spending in average from organization into NIS compliance. So this was already the case in the last years. But with the new legislative frameworks coming into the pictures, those measures will increase and supervision especially will become more stringent. So it's important for companies to be aware of the measures they'll need to take. You can see some here, actually, all of those that will be introduced in the market by legislative frameworks. And why this is important is because those measures have not been implemented in a consistent way in the market at the moment. So having them enshrined in law will allow for a more resilient ecosystem, and particular attention will be given to third-party risk management, where, as we saw, the supply chain risk is really increasing. So having this full view will allow for a more skill set introduced into companies. So this is important, is an important change, and it will not come without cost for companies when adjusting to introducing those requirements. Finally, let me close up with a few points on new technologies. So AI and quantum will finally be implemented and come into the legislative frameworks as well. So those new technologies will really change our approach to cyber resilience, of course, into creating new positive solution, but also bringing about real challenges in terms of new cryptography solutions and practices. And also when looking at AI in particular, the challenge there will be looking at who owns the data, the output data of AI, so the interfer data, meaning those data that AI has created to learn and to evolve. So this is not yet part of the debate, but it will be an important aspect to look at during the next negotiations. When we look at real opportunities of applying AI and quantum, I would say that the first one would be incident reporting. We're really looking at how to respond to this need expressed by public and private entities of complying with multiple reporting requirements. AI and quantum can really facilitate this by creating secure communication channels that work in terms of helping companies and authorities monitoring on compliance with reporting requirements. But more than that, they really aim at creating situational awareness at EU level. So here, the key of all those changes will really be, according to us, information sharing, not just for the sake of sharing, but for the purpose of reaching situational awareness. So a shared understanding of the threat landscape, which can feed into companies' understanding of the threat landscape, as much as enabling decision-making at European level. With this, I'll hand it over to Jan for a final remark, and then I'll be available for questions throughout the end of the session. Thank you.
Wonderful, Martina. Thank you. Just want to round up, I think, from what we see in the corporate world, for sure, with our industrial clients, with the clients I'm working with day to day, is that strong drive from the top, that very active role from a board is really crucial. And having that good oversight role, a strong leadership in cybersecurity really makes a difference. Not only during an incident, of course, when things happen, as we all know, it's not an if, it's a matter of when. When it happens, strong leadership is the key to actually recover quickly, to reduce that impact, and to continue with your services. So I think that's certainly an important point to keep addressing. And if it may be of any comfort, we do see that there is a listening ear that we have from the cybersecurity world at the board level. So when we did our Deloitte CEO survey a couple of weeks ago, it was recently published, and we see that cybersecurity is consistently, both across industries, across geographies, one of the top 5 priorities as mentioned by our CEOs. So we do have that listening here. I think the big challenge for us is to be able to find the right language to address and to open up that conversation, and for us also to dare to engage with the board level to actually make that happen. So I think that's an important role for each and every one of us. And from that governance, it also plays a role during the whole preparation phase, during when we start to implement measures. It's to create alignment across various units, and I think that's just as much valid in a corporate world as within my public sector clients. Having that unity of command, having alignment, sharing information again. A time to react is so crucial to actually make that happen, and that's what we really need to aim for. And that's really where we see that difference. And as mentioned, we can really be helped by those emerging technologies that we saw there. And we, as cybersecurity experts, we really need to embrace them. I'm actually also publishing a piece on cyber and AI, how that collaborates, will be published next week. So welcoming you to have a deep dive on that one as well, with some very tangible examples on how we can secure AI, but also how AI can help us in secure our environments. So with that, we hope we will be able to again embed cybersecurity into the day-to-day life, into those digital transformations. And that's, for me, I think, the key part to respond and to be ready for any eventuality on cyberspace that will happen. With that, Lorenzo, over to you back for the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan and Martin, for this broad presentation. So now I would like to open the floor, to have a reaction among the speakers, also interaction with the audience. I recommend to send your question over the chat. I would like to start one question that was already sent from Laura Pisareva to Raji Samani. How would you assess the vulnerability of small and medium-sized enterprise in light of the increasing threat and capability of perpetrators you describe? Are these firms prepared? Do they need specific tool support? Raji?
So actually, let me give you an example. Just before the pandemic, we did an assessment of RDP. So RDP is the most common entry vector for ransomware groups. And in January of last year, there was about 1.5 million accessible systems via the internet. And of course, this is one of the main drivers to this particular attack. By March, that number was about 3.5 million. And the part of the problem is that individuals, in a rush to kind of become digital and stay online and stay connected, basically left the back door open. And so the challenge that we face is that, you know, everybody became digital really in the last 2 years, but in doing so, they left these huge vulnerabilities, and not obviously just small businesses, but many businesses across the globe. And of course, this is now being actively exploited, and not only being actively exploited, but the credentials and the access to this are being openly traded on criminal forums. And so I would say all businesses have kind of are more vulnerable than they were 2 years ago. And the question about do they need specific tools and support, I don't think there are specific tools and support. The challenge that we have is that there's just so much content out there that I think, you know, it's difficult for small businesses to kind of focus on, okay, well, these are the 3 top things that I need to do. So we do have a problem. Unfortunately, the criminals are making huge sums of money as a result of it. But quite frankly, there is content out there. And I think like initiatives like No More Ransom is a really good start. The challenge becomes, does everybody know about things like No More Ransom? And I don't think the answer to that is clearly yes.
Okay, thanks, Raj.
Can I quickly pick into that one, just with two sides? So fully agree, of course, on everything being said. I think what we see in Belgium, particularly also in the small and medium businesses, one, there's really a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. So there's a lot of very basic hygiene rules that are not in place. And what we primarily notice there is that it's not a matter of them being aware of that it needs to happen. It's really a feeling of being very uncomfortable in actually involving cybersecurity people because they simply don't understand what we're talking about. So then that communication line is so crucial, and we're already in a very difficult space of looking for technology experts. But I think we need to, part of the problem is not just in the technology, and it's also mentioned by one of the questions I see popping up, but it's that human aspect. It's about being able to understand and to talk to our clients. And one of the ways that became apparent is that we have a funding initiative by the regional government in Belgium, the Flemish government, on helping small and medium businesses to increase their cybersecurity posture. And that's actually not being called upon. There is free advice, free consultancy, free tools given out to small and medium businesses, and they're simply not being used. People don't dare to step up. And where I also think there's a role to play from the industry side, from the cybersecurity industry, is when it really comes down to payments of these ransoms that are there. And there is a whole market out there, and quite a lot of players that are actually making a business out of negotiating with ransomware players, with those actors. And I think we really need also some further guidance there from a regulatory perspective on what is allowed there, what are the rules of the game, to equal that playing field and to make sure that we don't support those ransomwares and avoid them being successful.
Good, thanks, Jan. I don't see at the moment any other question here on the chat.
Can I just add a quick point though?
Sure.
You know, when we talk about cybersecurity, one of the challenges that I think we face collectively as an industry is it is difficult to articulate the impact of a cyber breach. And so if you were to go to a small business and say, what would be the impact if somebody stole your delivery van? Well, it's easy and simple to understand the impact that it could have. Part of the challenges that I think we face collectively is that there is really not enough information out there for people to be able to articulate what the impact is. And so specifically within small to medium-sized businesses, trying to articulate, hey, look, if you get hit by this or you open up this email, this could be the net result. And so, you know, I kind of want to echo Jan's points, which is, well, part of the reason people may not be putting their hands up is because, well, it's an IT problem, or it's a computer issue. But actually, it's bigger and broader than that. And so finding ways that we can articulate the impact, I think will be ways that we can start to get better engagement.
And I think the remark that is on there from Dimitri, if I see it correctly, humans will always play the most critical role in IT security. That's absolutely true, and it's a concept we are lovingly referring to. It's a quote I'm gonna steal from Veerle Peters, one of our directors. It's the concept of a human firewall. That human, and we always look at the human as the weakest link in cybersecurity, but they could just as well be our strongest defense we will ever get. And we also need to embrace the human nature and learn from how humans think and react to better protect our systems, and not just think from a technology side, but think from that human first angle. So that's, I think there's a lot we can learn in cybersecurity from the sides of sociology and psychology to make our lives easier and to make our more effective in protecting our critical assets.
Okay. I have a couple of questions I would like to ask. One is for Cuba. It's related to the issues of, this, the Cyber Resilience Act and the horizontal regulation. One of the critiques made to the horizontal regulation is that, we probably develop like some type of race to the bottom. In other words, this idea of the checklist, that if you comply with some of the security requirements, you'll be done. But to some extent, cybersecurity, it's a moving target. The technology changes, and also the attackers change their approach. So I was wondering if maybe also hypotheses like, sandboxes, can be used, for a given time to, to check how the regulation work in these cases, okay? And then the second question instead is for Raji. It's, he mentioned the importance of attribution, but for ransomware, it's extremely important to develop a coordinated approach worldwide, and how we coordinate, this need to find attribution with the, with the coordination among member states, because there are many members, sorry, not member states, member states, overall worldwide that maybe will not cooperate on this issue of attribution.
Lorenzo, first,
yes.
maybe you can see me, yeah, hear me.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
In response to your question, I mean, this doubts about, let's say, mentality or the general problem of ticking box mentality. I mean, I think it's across the board. I mean, in variety of, let's say, settings and policy challenges. I mean, you could also say that, if you have a cybersecurity policy at the level of the company, it's highly structured. I mean, there can be also still a mentality of checking the boxes and not being sufficiently alert, which I think is of fundamental importance in cybersecurity, to what is basically less obvious, unknown, or unpredictable. Now, I recall this discussion with reference to the certification framework, that having use of certified products may give a false sense of security. Again, I would fully agree with that. I mean, that's why we always try to hammer the message that, of course, there is nothing like, and everyone knows this very well, there is nothing like 100% security. There is no one silver bullet. Managing cybersecurity requires all sorts of various things to be taken together. Now, I would say, yes, there is such a risk, that if we regulate products, that may kind of somehow lower the guard of those who would be, deploying, solutions in the companies. But again, I think that risk can be mitigated. And specifically, I think one very important consideration in the context of these future measures is that to think about the whole life cycle of products. It is not just at the moment of the placement on the market that things have to be checked and verified. I don't want to go into the details of what type of conformity assessment would be used. But just the principle that it is not just at the moment when a software or product is released, but it is that we need to build in mechanisms that would make sure that the whole life cycle should be covered. And I would say the same story goes with the NIS directive. This is the fact that rollout of ISO standard at the level of the company. None of those things is a guarantee in its own, but I think it's a cumulative effect of these measures when you look at the behavior of the management of cybersecurity risk at the company level. Then we have this missing piece, which is really making sure that the products that are available conform to some basic cybersecurity standards. This combination is basically increasing the level of resilience. And that's how I think we should look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Raji?
Yeah, so actually, I think we're very lucky. Our global coordinated response to some of these attacks is actually better than it's ever been. And I think, a large reason for that is the work that's been done out of The Hague, specifically with the European Cybercrime Center. The establishment of JCAT, which is the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force, initially with Troels Orting, who, by the way, was absolutely visionary in his approach to modern law enforcement, for me, kind of demonstrates how modern law enforcement needs to address modern crime, because typically people aren't robbing banks with guns, they're using USB sticks now. So the challenge that we face is that, the cards are very much in the favor of the criminals. They can sit in their homes, don't have to leave, countries which don't necessarily cooperate with us. But the fact that we've got EC3 with support from, agencies all across the globe, the founding of No More Ransom, where there's over 150 partners now, things are better from a collaborative perspective than ever before. But the challenge is, of course, is that the cards are still very much stacked up in the favor of criminals. Again, they don't have to leave their shores. They can, they don't have to worry about GDPR. We do. They don't have to worry about NIS. We do. So, it is still in their advantage. But quite frankly, we've done more in the last few years than ever before, I think.
Okay. There is still a question from...
I see quite interesting questions indeed.
Which one? The last one from Raina. Could we envision specific legal obligation in terms of ransomware payment, negotiation? So far, it is an opportunistic consultancy market, and problems are starting to surface. Insurance companies started to liken ransomware payment to KNR, thus removing that service from their coverage policies. But truth be said, from an on-the-ground perspective, small and medium enterprise can resume some basic level operation by paying the ransom and retrieving some data. So how should we address these challenges? Who wants to answer?
Well, can I just actually give a very different viewpoint to Valerie, which is, we sit here from a policy perspective telling people not to pay a ransom. We tell insurance companies you shouldn't pay. And by the way, that is the right thing to do. But if you're a citizen, like for example, we saw in HSE in Ireland, or in Presbyterian Hospital in the US, where patients are being turned away. And we're saying, well, don't pay. Well, if I'm a patient, I'll do whatever, I'll pay the ransom myself. And so I think we've got to consider the policy decisions, but equally we've got to make, and I don't want to suggest we pay, but equally we've got to look at the gray, because I don't think it's a yes or a no decision. We've got to consider the middle ground here. And so, I know insurance companies are now beginning to increase premiums. I know some insurance companies are now walking away from cyber insurance policies. We've got to start to find a way to increase our capability and effectively find middle grounds. And I think, that's why initiatives like No More Ransom is so critical, because we're providing free decryptors. So look, the policy perspective my view is never to pay, but equally I've got to understand the context behind every single case. And look, if it's my life on the line, then my policy decision goes out the window. So I think we've got to consider the wider context, I believe.
Kuba. We cannot hear you, Kuba.
Actually, comment on some other questions that I have seen in the chat. I mean, on the ransomware, I mean, as Raj said, I mean, it's a very difficult challenge to crack. I mean, at this moment, you know, you can see pros and cons of different approaches, but this is something that we should definitely think. But I want to really focus maybe on these other questions. Let me just see the. So I can't. Yeah, I can see this. So there was a question about SMEs and support to digital transition. I mean, indeed, EU digital innovation hubs are one of the ways to support SMEs. I think this is more, you know, you could look at it. It's less maybe in the realm of DigiConnect, but DigiGrow. I mean, you have this policy on SMEs. You have now this idea of also SME envoy at the level of the union, but also at the level of member states. So just to really filter different policy initiatives from an SME perspective. Now, strictly from a cybersecurity perspective, we clearly see the need as part of the national cybersecurity strategy to see, let's say, a dedicated support to SMEs. And this is really beyond the obligations, because I think that we made, of course, a deliberate choice by not including small enterprises in the scope of the NIS directive, and medium-sized enterprises are again subject to a, let's say, I could say, slightly lighter regime. Now, I don't think that we would need yet another agency, you know, EU agency to support the digital transition of SMEs, because I mean there are quite a number of mechanisms. What is indeed important is to make sure that, notably through this SME Envoy initiative, that there is a really that SMEs are basically fully aware of the opportunities that they have to use. And in fact, indeed, if you look more broadly into the challenge of digital transition, there is clearly a lot that has to be done in this field. And then there was also one question about technological dependence. I would say how we are going to solve this problem. And again, I'm not sure it's about, let's say, solving the problem. It's a question of a degree of what we can do. And I think this is what you clearly see in the Digital Euro program. I mean, the idea is that we make some, let's say, you know, pointed investment together with member states in some areas, exactly for the purpose of having more capacities in Europe than they are today. But for that, of course, we have to be quite selective, and there has to be a very good, let's say, dialogue and collaboration also with the European industry, so that we make, let's say, the right policy choices in terms of where, let's say, the public, the taxpayers' money should go. But I would say the work program of on cybersecurity of the Digital Euro program shows, let's say, the direction in which we wish to go. Thanks.
Okay. We can quickly chime into that, well, Lorenzo. So I think on the SME side, I think they're bringing it to the market and making them feel comfortable, still an important one. At the same time, I think we also need to help the less cybersecurity focused or IT minded companies also in adopting and making the right choices. So I think also, like in Belgium, we've been thinking about, and I know Valerie from CCB is in there, I can maybe chime into that a bit later. But we've been thinking at kind of a certification and a labeling mechanism, like a nutrition score for food. How healthy is the food? How secure is actually the appliance, the asset that you're buying? What kind of testing has happened there? I think we need to really make it very approachable, not just for the SME, but also for the average consumer. When you buy a phone, when you buy a modem, when you buy a smart TV, how secure is that asset? How much emphasis, how much attention went there? And then a second point, if I may quickly come back to that cyber insurance part, because it is something that is pretty close to my heart. For a long time, we've been comparing cybersecurity to an insurance policy. I think certainly 5 years ago, that was typically the narrative that we had when we talked about people. Why would you need to do cyber? Why would you need to invest in IT security? It is your insurance. You also buy an insurance just in case things go wrong, and to then be able to fall back to it. I think actually that comparison has been taken a bit too far, and where I do think there is an issue is that a lot of organizations are looking at an insurance policy as their cybersecurity perspective. That is, the two are equal at this point in time, and they don't do much because they feel like when something happens, well, then just the insurance comes in, they pay us out, and we get back in business. When it's not that easy, as was mentioned also in the chat and by Raja as well. You have no guarantee that you will actually recover from such an attack. We were active with the Maersk case a couple of years ago. We were there very quickly. Actually, we were very close to bankruptcy with Maersk. It's something that didn't hit the big press, but within a few hours of bankruptcy, actually having to declare bankruptcy, we were able to recover the client from and then getting them back somewhat in business. That was a very close call. That was a major issue. And so where I think insurance can actually help, again, it's a discussion we're having with a number of the big insurance and reinsurance companies, is to link the fees to be paid to the actual measures taken. And it's just the same with your car insurance. If you take a car insurance, the more safety measures you have on your car, the lower your premium will be for your car insurance. Most of the cyber insurances that are on the market today do not look at the actual maturity, the actual measures that are being taken with our clients. And they just look at what is the size of the business, what would be the cost of a potential ransom attack or a cyber attack, and let's link our fees to that potential impact. But they don't take those mitigating controls into account. So I would do a warm call out there for anyone in the audience also who would be linked into the industry side or from a policy making perspective, to also include that mitigating factor, the measures that are being taken, to take that into account when those policies are being described, and to take it from there.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that we are running out of time, and so we should close the opening session. I think it was with a great start. And now we'll move on the second part of today's event. And I will give the floor to Luigi Rebuffi, Secretary General of EXO, for the session 1, the NIS2 directives and its way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Good morning, everybody. We are starting now the second panel, which will look at the NIS2 directive, which has been just approved by the Parliament, by the Council. We know that there will be an approval by the Telecom Council in 2 days. And then the trilogue will start under the French presidency of the Union, beginning of January, for an approval that I've been told that will be around June of next year. So this is the situation now with the panel. I hope we have everybody ready. So we will have a panel with Eva Kaili, member of the European Parliament, NIS2 Shadow Rapporteur. Florian Pennings, who is Director for Government Affairs from Cybersecurity, Microsoft. Sandra Schmitz, who is a postdoctoral researcher at University of Luxembourg. Svetlana Schuster, Head of Sector Implementation and Review of the NIS Directive at DG Connect. And I'm Luigi Rebuffi, Secretary General of EXO, European Cybersecurity Organization. So we will have each speaker delivering a 10 minutes introductory speech, and then we will have the time left for a discussion among the panelists and with the audience. So we will start with Eva Kaili, will present the work done at the European Parliament on this proposal. Eva, if you can come in. Hello. So I don't have any return from Eva, sorry. Maybe if she's not connected yet, maybe we could start from the Commission. So Svetlana Schuster, so will tell us the Commission assessment on the status of the proposal. So Svetlana.
Yes, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you
Hello.
for joining us.
Yeah.
So please, so can you tell us about the from the Commission side, what is the situation there?
I mean, for us, we from the Commission point of view, we are of course extremely glad to see that basically both co-legislator will be very soon ready to enter into the next stage of the negotiation, the trilogues, and will be able to conclude the legislative process on these two proposals with the political agreement under the upcoming French presidency. I think Kuba mentioned that already in the beginning of the event that for the NIS 1, actually, we need 3 years to conclude that. And now we see that things are moving faster, and for which we are very, very happy. What we have seen during these last months was a very, very strong dedication from both, from the Parliament and the Council to reach a common position, which certainly stems from the conviction that there is no time to lose, that we need to act now, and everybody is fully aware of how urgent this task is. Which is basically to have a future-proof and robust horizontal framework for cybersecurity in the European Union that can make a significant a further step towards society and economy, which is better prepared against cyber attacks and cyber incidents. In this increasingly high digitalization of the world in which we are living in. So overall, the speedy conclusion of this legislation would basically provide all stakeholders with legal certainty in order to be able to focus on jointly facing the growing cybersecurity challenges. And we appreciate a lot that Parliament maintained the overall high level of ambition of the Commission's proposal. And yes, we are looking forward, and also on the Council side, we are looking very much to the technical meetings and to the trilogues that will come hopefully very soon. That's all on my side. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank you, Svetlana, for these introductory words. Do we have Eva Kaili connected with us or not? I also asked the organizer if they can give me some information about that. In the meantime, maybe we go on with Florian. Florian, are you connected with us?
Yeah, I am. Hello.
Okay, so good morning.
Good morning.
Do you want to start while we are waiting for the Eva Kaili?
That's good. I will give it a go.
Please.
So thanks, and hi Svetlana. Good to see you again. And looking forward to this discussion. Yes, what we've seen so far with the NS2 proposal, indeed, from an industry perspective. By the way, Florian Pennings, I work for Microsoft, indeed, is that Parliament and Council have supported the file. We've all seen, I think, you have to be living under a rock if you don't see we needed an update and an upgrade of the NAS1. And then if you look at the current developments on the NAS2 and the ambition that was in the file, we have been pretty much supportive of all of that. We've obviously made some comments here and there to say how we should improve it or where we ask for more harmonization, etc. But I actually want to use the next couple of minutes to focus on the opportunities of NIS2, because we've done a great majority of the negotiations within Parliament, within the Council, and there are really some great opportunities to address in order to move the file forward, and also to see, hey, how can we as industry contribute, and what kind of cooperation models can we further explore to ensure that EU cybersecurity resilience is to that level that we all want, all industry, government, citizens. It starts with one thing. If you look at the NIS2, how you can see this and perceive this a little bit is like an informal kind of contract between entities in scope and between governments. If you look at that contract, you see that the industry, they contribute with their requirements, they invest resources, they have a proactive, cooperative mindset. And if you look at the government side, they also need to do all kinds of elements and implement resources, allocate more resources, invest in skills, etc., etc. And that's sometimes that we don't really focus on so much, because we all love to dive into the details of requirements and what does this mean on certification, what does this mean on reporting. But essentially, this brings together those two buckets of resources, and we shouldn't forget that. And we've seen it with the implementation of the 2016 NIS, the first directive. Now that's going to be built out with the NIS2, which is a great development that we all should look at from an opportunity point of view. Additionally, cyber is per definition public-private, or it needs a multi-stakeholder approach. I think we've passed the discussions there. I think that's a fait accompli. Everybody understands and accepts that. And if you then think about that, I would like to point out four opportunities for the NIS2 and the implementation phase that hopefully we'll see being kicked off in 2022. So the first one would be further implementation and understanding of the risk-based approach. We are very happy that within the corporation and within the structure of the NIS2 and the feedback it got from Parliament and Council, there's a clear opening for further exploring risk-based approaches. Invest where you need to invest. That's from an industry point of view extremely important, because we also have at one point limited resources. If we have very wide definitions, it's very difficult for us to assess where to directly invest them and still be able to fall within the regulations. The second opportunity really is harmonization. Think about the benefit of both entities in scope, the governments and then the entities, to share and use existing best practices. And here think about, for example, certification. There's a lot of knowledge around certification, standardization, outside the EU, inside the EU. We have the opportunity to use, and for example, via Article 21, to focus on increased cooperation on certification. However, we need to build that off on international accepted standards, international approved certifications, include those processes that already have proven to be successful. Then there's another element also around incident mitigation. Think about how you work together on mitigating incidents, how you work together on thwarting threats, how you work together on sharing that information. We have gained a lot of experience across the globe as Microsoft, but also other industry players. We can really further harmonize our knowledge, and that really leads to bringing people together. And it brings me to my third point, increased coordination. For entities like cloud service providers, it's extremely important to be subject to clear reporting lines and requirements. The NIS2 proposal to, for example, maintain the main establishment principle is therefore very welcomed, because it avoids fragmentation and legal uncertainties. That's extremely important because we provide products and services within 27 different member states. If we have to report 27 different times within 27 different regimes, that's going to be very very impactful on our resources, and at the same time will also lead to more fragmented security approaches. So that's why we are very happy with the proposal as it's been made by the Commission, and also if we see how it's been further developed within Council and within the Parliament, we're pleased with that direction. And then the last point, the last opportunity I want to point out here is the development of structural cooperation. And then mainly around information and analysis sharing. One of the main discussions we've been involved in is a discussion, for example, around incident reporting, where we as industry have made a clear call to move that deadline, that threshold line from 24 to 72 hours. We've explained why, because we believe it's about actionable intelligence. We think that within 24 hours, we won't have a lot to report based on the experiences we have. Now, the Council and Parliament have reached certain positions there that haven't led to that 72 hours approach. That's all within a democracy, the way these developments go. However, I want to point out one thing. We've been very much focused on the thresholds, on the legal requirements, but take it one step back. Before you start sharing that information within a reporting requirement, there's all kinds of opportunities to work together and to share your best practices, to work together on exercises within a voluntary framework. And we're also happy to see that the NIS2 from the beginning, as a proposal laid down by the Commission, addressed that element. We also think that you should focus a little bit more on that as well. Try to cooperate with each other, try to invest in relationships, set up working groups under the cooperation group where you can work together with the industry, the entities in scope, to already get to know each other, share your experiences with incident reporting, share your views on threats mitigation, maybe do exercises together, because then you will learn more from each other, and in the process get more insights as governments inside what happens within, for example, cloud service providers, and cloud service providers will get more insights in what's the mindset behind the policymakers when they reach to their policy making processes. So if I sum that up, what we often see is that industry is most of the times frontline defender, and that creates a lot of experience, expertise, but it comes with responsibilities as well. The NIS2 creates a great opportunity and mechanism to further build that out. And what we believe is that if you focus on that element of where we can work more together, where we can cooperate more, and in that mindset of the NIS2, there's a lot of opportunities to further explore. The future of the NIS2, one of the elements that we do want to point out here is that we've seen the ambition of the European Commission, member states, but also of Parliament, to create more EU cybersecurity policies, which from our perspective, I think is a great endeavor, to create more harmonization, to work more together. But we always call and ask for more caution when it comes down to further cooperation and more coordination between different files. We've got, for example, the EU Cybersecurity Resilience Act coming up. There's more sectoral legislation on cybersecurity coming up as well, that I think that you, Luigi, will be interested in as well from your point of view. So how do we mold that together in the right way possible? By involving stakeholders, making sure those processes are open and transparent. And I know that's already the case, but we always want to call this out, because in the beginning of these processes, it's important to set these objectives and the key objectives right. And then finally, if we continue this, then basically our call with all kinds of EU cybersecurity legislation is about clarifying the objectives and to constantly invest in increasing legal certainties. And that means that for the NIS2, we are very much in favor of also looking this and then coming back to my first as a contract between governments and entities working together and trying to explain as much as possible to each other on threats and incidents and share information even before we reach those thresholds. And I think that's a very important element to it. And then handing back over to you, Luigi, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Florian, for we'll come back on certain point you had mentioned, especially last one, as contract between government and entities. That is, I think this is really will be the leitmotif for the future. So now we have Eva Kiley, who has joined the panel. So Eva, you can start present what you have done. You were a shadow rapporteur of NS2, the Parliament, and tell us a little bit how difficult or what were the challenges, and are you satisfied of the results?
First, thank you so much for inviting me to the CEPS forum on cybersecurity. I think it's a very important and timely event to be organized on such an important topic. And I think that the existing NIS directive was actually necessary. It was the first EU-wide legislation to set up minimum cybersecurity requirements for businesses and organizations in the EU. The fast-paced evolution of the cyber ecosystem requires actually a revision of the legislation, and we hope we will conclude with the trialogues. We will start the trialogues in December, and we will be able to conclude very soon. We hope that the result of our work strengthens the requirements and extends also the scope to more entities with a high-risk profile. Showing that Europe is determined to respond to any cyber threat, also with a pandemic being a catalyst for digitalisation. I think now it's more necessary than ever to ensure our safety online. Now, our work in the Parliament, and since we have, I would say, consensus, we managed to agree on most of the points. We managed to elevate Europe's resilience, autonomy, and collective knowledge to be able to detect and react faster to cyber attacks and threats. It was a very interesting presentation because I think we have managed to have a report in the end that it's going to be accepted, and I think. Because it had also to address two things, the technical but also the geopolitical of how the technology of cybersecurity should protect us. And we have also critical technologies and emergent technologies like 5G, cloud computing, AI, that could affect our national security, economy, and also society. So since we could see cyberspace as a battleground, and we're expecting also a new legislative proposal on cyber resilience, I think it's going to be more on the standards. We are trying to set the agenda for global standards here. So I would point out a few things that the European Parliament has proposed. So privacy by design and effective data protection. We want to have a clear understanding that we will keep respecting GDPR, and we will try to integrate the e-privacy directive. Also, we strengthen the language of the use of encryption to prevent any efforts to weaken end-to-end encryption and close any possible loopholes to ensure effective data protection. Cybersecurity capabilities fit for the future, so we want to have future-proof strategies and integrate policies on AI technology, open source applications, and cyber hygiene practices in their national cybersecurity strategies towards modernizing the culture of cybersecurity. Also, what we added here is changes to elevate the technical capabilities of CSIRTs. It's very important as we have different member states and different capabilities to harmonize. So we want them to be able to prevent and defend against emerging threats and modern cyber attacks. So I think also here the geopolitics of cybersecurity with China and Russia trying to intervene, it would be very important for us to manage to have a better understanding. A stronger ENISA, this is the third point. So we extended the tasks of ENISA and of course the capacity of ENISA to monitor, to foster alignment with the national cybersecurity standards, and also to streamline the format of incident reporting. I think we also try to give them now, we are struggling to give them also more flexibility to achieve that, because it's not an easy task to have 27 different member states trying to have a harmonized approach. Then we have the cybersecurity capacity building and training. I'd say we Also try to ensure to have appropriate training, a training framework of their staff, and also codes of conduct that would ensure trustworthiness of operations. And this training has to happen for all employees of essential but also important entities in a regular basis. So the Parliament's position here would promote the transfer of technology and cybersecurity tools through the CSIRS network and the peer reviews. Now, I have just 3 more points. I don't want to exhaust you, but I will talk about the cybersecurity capacity building and training, and then about the SME support and structured cooperation with the private sector. That I think it definitely matches what I referred to, because we have to integrate policies for SMEs. We have to allow them to support their capacity to apply all the cybersecurity new recommendations we have to address the specific needs they might have, and even supply chain challenges that are faced in national cybersecurity strategies. So we also added, and we are suggesting the promotion of cybersecurity PPPs to leverage the expertise of the private sector and support member states' authorities in developing state-of-the-art services. I think if we also have, we'll have a single point of contact for SMEs. I think these proposals will address the challenges such as low cyber awareness and the high cost of cybersecurity solutions for an increased level of threat faced by SMEs. Finally, 2 points that I also heard Florian mentioning: the harmonized incident reporting. The European Parliament is proposing to have a timeline that would be harmonized, and I have to clarify here in advance that we're talking about significant incidents affecting the availability of services. So the moment you realize, within 24 hours, we have to have an alert and a report, and then the underlying data that go with the attack within 72 hours. And I think clarity is key to ensure the effective implementation of the directive, and we proposed also definition of significant incidents based on the European Electronic Communications Code, and also the reporting on a voluntary basis. Finally, we maintain the provision of entities informing the recipients of a service of protective measures to be taken in the event, of course, again, that's of an incident or of a known risk to an entity. And we want to have to task ENISA and the cooperation group with developing common notification templates to have a harmonized approach to report significant incidents. We are also trying to propose the use of delegated acts to specify the type of information to be submitted. And the last point is managerial accountability and review of scope for large online platforms. I think it's very important. I know there was a lot of resistance, but in the end, it has to be brought at the highest level, the cybersecurity we want all to achieve, and the CEO should be involved. So it's not very easy to get CEOs that are good and they understand cybersecurity, but it has to be addressed by boardrooms across European companies in advance, and not just when the attack has happened. So we maintain the provision of a temporary ban against the chief executive officer from exercising his functions in case of persistent non-compliance, to hold managers accountable for elevating the cybersecurity of entities. I think that it's very important, because we also called the Commission to consider the redesignation of the digital service providers that are designated as very large online platforms under the DSA, or gatekeepers under the DMA, as essential entities, to create a more demanding supervision framework. I think these are the most important topics we addressed, and of course, we expect cybercrime to reach $10 trillion by 2025, and the businesses are expected to experience a ransomware attack even every 10-11 seconds into 2021. So we believe that new working practices and hybrid conditions are making it really critical to do that. So I believe we managed to have a very strong framework here, and I hope it's well received. Again, we understand that we will have to discuss, or again, maybe have a follow-up after the trilogues, but I'd be very happy to hearing your suggestions and your impressions on the text that we worked with my colleagues.
Thank you, Eva, for your insight on what happened in the Parliament. We'll come back on further question of, well, discussion with the panelists and the participants who have a chat. Now let's move to the last participant in the panel, who is Sandra Schmitz, who is postdoctoral researcher at the University of Luxembourg. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So hello, everyone. I guess, first of all, we must recall that the first periodic review of the NIS directive was initially foreseen to be completed in May 2021. And so in line with Svetlana, it's quite remarkable where we stand today. Almost a year ago, the Commission published its proposal as part of a package of measures to further improve the resilience and incident response capacities in the field of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection. And whenever we look at the scope of NIS 2.0, we must bear in mind the accompanying instruments, namely the new strategy on cybersecurity, as well as the CER directive proposal, which aims to mitigate the physical threats to such operators. I remember that last year in this forum, we discussed the shortcomings and deficiencies of the NIS directive, such as inter alia, the limited scope of application, the fragmented regulatory landscape, which has been the result of unclear requirements. Obviously, the minimum harmonization approach resulted in national identification methodologies of operators of essential services that differed significantly in terms of which types of services are considered as essential and to which of these services the NIS directive should ultimately apply. Fragmentation could also be seen in the key part on security measures and incident reporting, as well as the field of supervision. We were also confronted with limited cooperation in practice. Nevertheless, we must recognize that the NIS directive actually paved the way for a change in mindset in relation to the regulatory approach to cybersecurity in many member states. The Commission proposal responds to the aforementioned weaknesses identified in the review process. The overarching objectives of NIS 2.0 are the creation of a more harmonized framework with a more coherent and harmonized level playing field, improving cooperation on all levels, increase the cybersecurity preparedness, and improve capacities for mitigating risks and handling incidents effectively. In terms of harmonization, as I said before, the CER directive and NIS directive have to be seen as one package and be coherent. I understand that alignment is difficult since member states define what is critical and essential in their country under the CER proposal, while under the NIS 2.0 proposal, the European Union does so for all member states. The NIS proposal eliminates the distinction between operators of essential services and digital service providers and introduces a new classification of essential entities and important entities. The aim is to provide for a level playing field for actors across the European Union, where the identification procedure adopted previously differed significantly. In terms of cross-sectoral alignment, where the current approach led to a variety of competent authorities to receive incident reports, to unite security requirements and notifications under the NIST umbrella, this provides more clarity. So having one regime eliminates any issues as to whether a sector-specific act provides measures with equivalent effect and can therefore be deemed ex specialis. To avoid double regulation, repealing sector-specific provisions on incident reporting and security measures, it is key to enhance consistency in the legal framework. So repealing, for instance, the provision in the EECE will definitely provide for more clarity. Nevertheless, reporting provisions remain in other interventions with other objectives as under the GDPR for personal data breaches. The alignment of reporting timeframes, as already mentioned before, with the 72-hour timeframe under GDPR, and which has also been proposed by Parliament, I think goes too far. The argument of alignment with further European Union interventions is also not quite strong. It can easily be rebutted if we look at the DORA proposal, where reporting of security incidents in the financial sector requires much shorter timeframes. And as regards the initially proposed 24-hour time frame, one must not ignore that this only relates to a primary initial report with very basic information. Considering the fragmented supervisory landscape, the proposed single entry point for all notifications required under the directive and other union law, such as the data protection legislation, makes things easier for reporting entities and may unlock the exploitation also of synergies in incident reporting. As regards cooperation, the expansion of cooperation between the national competent authorities to exchange information, while also expanding the task of the NIST cooperation group and the CEPS network, recognizes that not only in order to respond to attacks and vulnerabilities, but also to prepare for threats, information exchange remains key. I will not go into detail here as regards the envisaged coordinated vulnerability disclosure, as this will be subject to the following panel. But I would like to stress that as regards the CEPS, an extension of responsibilities must go hand in hand with improving the quality of already assigned tasks. In that regard, I consider the Parliament amendments requiring that CEPS are sufficiently prepared, for instance, by improving their technical capabilities, as quite important. Resources also play an important role to provide the trust necessary for the role as coordinator. A key improvement of the proposal, I think, has also been the enlistment of basic security elements and that these also include supply chain security. The divergences in incident reporting shall be eliminated by more precise provisions. We now have a tiered plan in incident reporting. But as regards the incident handling, I guess we look forward to interesting discussions in a trilogue as to whether the reporting of incidents that have caused harm will be extended to include incidents that only have the potential to cause harm. While the Commission proposal contains these near misses, the Parliament rejects this. I do not agree with Parliament that the reporting of near misses is unrealistic. It is feared that competent national authorities could be confronted with receiving just too many notifications and consequently shift attention and limit security resources to deal with these notifications rather than the effective handling of real incidents. However, I agree that a cyber threat and a report-worthy cyber incident are not the same thing, and that entities may struggle to determine what can be considered a near miss. Is this already an email which is easily to be identified as a phishing attempt? However, a near miss may also be the result of sophisticated and appropriate security measures and thus potentially exploit weaker security in place at another provider. I do not negate the risk of over-reporting, but I struggle kind of with the evidence to support the claim. For instance, the German implementation of the NIS directive actually foresees such reporting, but there are no reports as to whether this has resulted in a field over-reporting. In fact, the German National NIS Authority only received 419 incidents reports in total in 1 year, and yet what constitutes an incident with the potential to cause harm needs to be elaborated. If the reporting of near misses is deleted from the proposal, one should, and here I totally agree with Florian, one should think of incentives to encourage voluntary reporting. We can see that the final Parliament report now at least requests that the recipients of the service affected should be informed of protective measures or remedies to such known risks. Finally, and very importantly, the Parliament in its report also addresses the relationship of the NIS directive to union legislation on personal data protection. While the Commission's proposal, besides clarification that it is without prejudice to the GDPR and the e-privacy directive, remains silent as regards personal data processing, the suggested amendments by the Parliament introduce more precise references to the GDPR and legitimate data processing, and thus, as Eva just mentioned, integrate GDPR and the e-privacy directive into the common cybersecurity framework. And the rest I leave for discussion.
Thank you, Sandra. Maybe, I don't know, Eva, you want to enter the discussion to comment what Sandra just said about the certain points? I don't know. Well, In general, actually, I will ask the other panelists, if they want simply to make comments on what has been said. And we also encourage the participant to write question on the chat. We have some question coming up, but first I would like a discussion among the panelists. So please.
Luigi, if I may,
please
take the floor. Yes. So Sandra and Florian, thank you, and Eva, thank you very much for all the points brought here. So it's really very interesting to listen to all the different views, and I'm really glad to see that also with all of you, we have it looks like the Commission proposal has addressed the really key issues that are at stake for the cybersecurity, and that we all share that the idea that we should have and is to adopt it in an ambitious way. Maybe I will go to two specific points which were discussed here. With regard to Florian, I also see Goran in the chat. I think maybe we have one slight different view in terms of incident reporting, and this is about the deadline for reporting of incident, and then I will come back also to Sandra and the reporting of near misses. So basically, why it's important, or what was the rationale of the Commission proposal to have this 24 hours reporting? As you see, it's not only one reporting deadline, so there are two mandatory reportings. The first is the 24 hours, and the second reporting requirements is a report within 1 month. So the 24 hours, why is important? And first of all, as Sandra also explained, it is not a full reporting, so it has nothing to do with the full reporting that is required under the GDPR. So it's merely a notification, initial notification, to make aware the cybersecurity authorities that there is something possibly significant going on, and this knowledge would be possibly very important also to warn other entities that may be impacted by the ongoing cyber incident. So the entities in this way, they will not be forced to submit a lot of data. As I often say, it could be a simple call or an email could be even sufficient just to raise the first awareness, and then of course later there will be a full report which will come 1 month later. And also from the first and from the second reporting deadline, there are exceptions. So the entity, if there is the difficulties to comply with both deadlines, they can agree and to have a longer period agreed upon the CSIRT or the competent authority. And why is also the 24 hours so important? This initial notification basically also will trigger the need, the possibility for the entities which are suffering cyber attacks to look for to seek for a help from the sister, from the competent authority, so that they can so that the authorities can provide them with a very important help guidelines how to mitigate the ongoing incident. And I think especially for not for large entities, but for medium small, this can be of a very important asset or benefit to handle the cyber attacks. And as Sandra also mentioned, the 24 hour, if we look into the financial sector and also other sectors, there is a much shorter deadlines foreseen also at national level legislation, because when we were doing our evaluation report of the implementation of the current NIS directive, we have found that many member states have basically reporting of 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, so even less than 24 hours, which we propose in the NIS directive. Then I will go to the second point, which is, I think it's a bit of misunderstanding. The NIS directive, what we foresee is in the paragraph paragraph which says that significant incident will need to be reported. It's not about, it's really reporting of incident, not of near misses. So the formulation that the incident should be significant if the incident has caused or has the potential to cause substantial disruption. So this is, the incident should happen. So we should have a breach of availability, confidentiality of the service provided. So this should be given. However, with this potential, what we want to say is the impact that this should have on the significance, whether the impact, whether the entity will have knowledge about the significance of this impact. That's why we use the language potential impact, because when we were drafting the law, we were thinking from the perspective of an entity. When you experience as a company the incident, in the first time, you cannot know how much in the first couple of hours or days. You don't know whether you will have 100,000 euro losses, or this incident will have a significant impact on other entities. So it is difficult for the entity to have this knowledge. However, based on experience with other incidents, based on the characteristic of the cyber attacks, the company or the ICT people, they can assume that this incident is so significant that it could potentially have a huge impact. And this is actually what we want to address, that not only the certainty, but also that once the entity is in a position to assume that the incident can have significant impact, they will report this to the competent authority. And near misses, we mentioned that also in our proposal, but this is strictly on a voluntary basis report for in terms of reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Svetlana. Do you want to join the discussion? Florian, I see you.
I'd love to. Thanks a lot, really, and Svetlana. I think that the starting point is the same, and that's about sharing information and analysis as quickly as possible. And I think we're in complete alignment there. The only differentiations that we've been trying to explain is, if you look at it from a perspective of sitting inside a CERT or CSERT, these are the boys and the girls that are touching the buttons. They get all kinds of events on a daily basis, a lot of information. They need to act on that. If we were just to send them within 24 hours, hey, this is what happened, it's an email, it's a telephone call, and there's no actionable intelligence that they can act on in that message. Also, what Raj Samani said he said, let's focus on actionable intelligence. That's exactly what as an industry we're trying to call for. There need to be elements in that information provision that we provide that they can act on. If there's nothing in there, it's just an email saying, hey, we have an issue with server XYZ dealing with these products and services. We don't know more. We'll see you back in a month. You're losing that window of opportunity. So with that in mind, we said, extend that to 72 hours, but with undue delay, check that if you see that there's a lot of times people stretch it or entity stretches until 71 hours or 70 hours, you need to put an evaluation mechanism in there or another means. Say, yeah, now you're misusing the system. Because sometimes within 48 hours or 50 hours, you just have more, so you can provide actionable intelligence back that they can act on. Because otherwise it will be a loose hollow. If you take, for example, SolarWinds, where we've been actively involved and we've been quite open about this as well. A lot of blogs on the Microsoft portal on that one. We only realized after 1 month, 2 months, the specifics. So even that 1 month report, if that will be a deadline after we've established it, might even be too short. So, and that's why I'm really focusing. I'm happy that Sandra also picked it up. Is this is the threshold line. This is the last resort. Invest in everything before. I've worked in these cyber security operations. Invest before. Invest in a relationship. Start to know each other, that you feel comfortable with sharing without being pushed through the legislative framework, because then you'll get minimal possible, because we have to. It's about wanting to and creating an environment where you are able to share with each other. That's where we're coming from. So we're coming from the same point. We just think that we need to slide a little bit. And that's why we're really happy, Ms. Kylie, with the proposal from Parliament, where at least that was taken into account, the distinction between 72 hours versus 24 hours, because that moves a little bit closer to that line. Thanks.
Thank you. Eva, you want to comment?
Yeah, so I think it's quite clear that we are giving this opportunity to inform in 24 hours once you have realized it is a significant incident, basically once your services are taken down. So this is something that is not easy to miss, and it doesn't cover anything else. So it's at the point where you realize it's a significant incident taking place, and of course all the data was said in 72 hours, and I think everybody was happy there when they realized that it's not from the moment it happens, so you don't have these obligations. It's when you realize and your system is not working anymore to provide services. And the definition of that, as I mentioned in my initial speech, is based on the European Electronic Communications Code and the reporting of significant cyber threats on a voluntary basis. So I think since we maintained the provision of entities informing the recipients of a service of protective measures or remedies to be taken in the event of an incident or a known risk to an entity, we removed all these concerns that it would be too much, because I myself mentioned that businesses are expected to experience a ransomware attack every 11 seconds. Okay, I understand it takes more to send an email, so it wouldn't be rational, okay, so and effective. So I think we've overcome the problems there. Again, I think also we have to have a follow-up after the trilogues, but I believe now we have a strong realization of how we should act. And one reason why we want to have NIS2, I have to say, is that we understand that everybody considers that it's better for them to pay any cost or any penalty that we would impose than creating a cybersecurity infrastructure for their businesses. And we want to avoid that. We want to ensure that they will take this responsibility serious by design, as long as this is possible.
But you mentioned the trilogue. What do you expect? I mean, do you see any major differences from what came out from the council and your expectation from the parliament?
Well, we did have some, let's say, things to discuss, leftovers, that I believe it would be interesting to see how that goes. One would be the managerial responsibility. It would be the 24 hours. I think we will overcome this. And then we had the European Parliament. We proposed to have to not actually apply to any root name servers, the NIS2 directive. And this also, I think, it remove the problems that we would have from root servers outside EU, and extraterritorial application to global DNS operators is essential, given that the EU citizens receive online services from domains registered outside the EU. So we try to strike a balance there. But I think we might have to further discuss and see the approach that we have. Then also about how ENISA could have the flexibility to take all these tasks and how to ensure that member states will be able to have similar capacity and capabilities to provide the same cybersecurity support for its businesses. So these are some of the issues that I have identified and that we might have to discuss further. So to ensure that the funding that the CSERT and the NISA, they are able to give the support that we expect, and then that we understand also that the extraterritorial application should be addressed by us and also should be accepted by the at the geopolitical level, then by the Commission to our allies. And I think these would be the most important ones. And then the 24 hours, I think, with the explanations provided also here, it's something that we won't have to discuss again.
Yeah, I think it will be an interesting discussion, as has been said. by Sandra. Florian, just to you look quite satisfied of these results. No, am I wrong? Because I remember when at the time, when the NAS 1, we can say, has been approved. That was the day, by the way, when we signed the public-private partnership with Oettinger at the Parliament in Strasbourg. I remember that Oettinger was telling me, now we have to go for NAS 2. So I was already looking forward. Are you expecting NAS 3 or are you quite satisfied?
I think this is a question more for for Svetlana and Kuba on the call, but listen, we do believe that NAS2 was needed because you need to constantly invest in cybersecurity, and regulation is just one means for that. It's about the mindset of working together and sharing and creating frameworks to share, to work with each other more. And obviously there are elements in that and underneath that baseline where we say, you could have done that a little bit better, or we could have created more harmonization there. For example, in Article 21, we think it goes too fast to already create that requirement. Nevertheless, it's in there. So we need to make the best of it. So then include some additional processes on consultation, stakeholder involvement, ensuring that you listen to cybersecurity X articles that already address that certification element. But all in all, I think it's a great step forward, and I really have a lot of respect for European Commission on how they did this in the speed they did, as well as for Parliament and Council. So this is really my head off. And of course, we have
politically correct or what? No, okay. Sandra, do you have some comment on this, because we have to close. Actually, we should have closed now, but very quickly, Sandra, a comment, and then also Svetlana for the end.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Florian just said. It's quite remarkable where we stand today with the proposal, and I also welcome many of the amendments submitted by Parliament, especially as regards the integration of personal data processing regulation. I also welcome the distinction between the 24-hour reporting and the 72-hour, the 24 for the significant incident. Yeah, and I think it's really taking up speed, and if you just, as you just mentioned, we will see a final vote in June. Yeah, interesting times ahead. So.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Svetlana, do you want to have a final word? Apparently, it's you should be proud, Eva, and also on the Parliament side and the Commission side. Also, you should be proud of these results. Some final comment.
Yes, I'm quite convinced that we will continue the work and with the Parliament, with the colleagues from the Parliament and the Council. I'm really personally convinced that we will have a political agreement within a few months. So given the all ambitions which is behind this proposal on both sides, I think we are on a good way to make this happen. So thank you very much for this discussion and for the invitation. Bye.
So thank you, everybody, because now we have to close. Time is over. Thank you again, Eva, Sandra, Svetlana, and Florian, and all the participants who have followed us this morning. And have a nice day.
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
Lorenzo, you are taking over?
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much to everybody. And now we'll have a 15 minutes virtual break, coffee break, and then stay with us because, you have been very patient. The churn rate is extremely low so far, and we'll have a great session on coordinated vulnerability disclosure at 12:15, and we'll have some insight from ENISA, from a study that's been recently done by ENISA, also some testimony from key people involved in the coordinated vulnerability disclosure policy in the EU. So let's reconvene at 12:15. Okay, bye. Well, hi, it's 12:15, so we are ready to restart for the last sessions. I see Raina ready to go, and this artificial intelligence for smartphones gives some trouble sometimes. So I will give the floor to Raina Stamboliska, head of research, Raina Stamboliska strategy. And she spent a lot of time in wonderful prepared this session, and so I will that all of you will like. So Raina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for this warm welcome, and thank you everyone for staying with us. And again, thank you to the CEPS team for organizing this event. I'm delighted to be here and to be chairing and facilitating this session on how we deal with vulnerabilities. So our goal today is to explore and provide insights and expert knowledge on vulnerability disclosure and treatment approaches and the different policymaking efforts in the EU on that topic. And why is this important? Because vulnerabilities turn out to be a special kind of digital animal, if you like. So they have existed ever since we started having connected systems, and they will exist as long as we have connected systems. So vulnerabilities come up as a topic of everlasting responsibility, if you like, for all stakeholders. So from a risk management perspective, because we've been talking a lot about how we manage risk and who is responsible, even liable for what, we can say quite safely that reducing digital risk is intimately linked to how we handle vulnerabilities. So for this session, I'm joined by our distinguished guests today. We have with us Marnix Dekker from ENISA, Valérie van der Geten from the Belgian Cybersecurity Center, Kevin Gallerin from ESW Hack, and Laurent Bernat from the OECD. So we'll begin this session with short introductory remarks from each of our guests, and then we'll get into the discussion. You're, of course, more than welcome to ask questions through the Q&A model of the chat, and we will address them and ask the participants all those questions. So without further ado, Marnix, you start off this session today. Thank you for being with us. You work for ENISA, the European Agency for Cybersecurity, which I think doesn't need further presentations in this assembly today. I would like to you to tell us what is the state of play for coordinated vulnerability disclosure in the EU? Thank you.
Thank you, Raina. Thank you also Lorenzo, CEPS for organizing this interesting conference. So happy to be able to take part, even online. Yeah, before diving into the state of play, ENISA, of course, just very briefly, we are a facilitator. We're not a security agency ourselves. We work with the 27 member states and the CSIRTs and the security agencies there to help them improve cybersecurity in their countries. So we have a bit of a hub and collaboration approach to many topics, and also here. So just briefly before I dive into the state of vulnerability disclosure policies in the EU, just to remind everyone very briefly, security research is not, outside security research is not a panacea. I mean, we should not forget that the real responsibility to not introduce vulnerability in the code and to address vulnerabilities if they are found is with the vendor. So we should not think that all the security research or that most of the vulnerabilities that are found are sort of found by people in a basement or in somewhere amateurs or without working in a company and so on. It is true that some vulnerabilities are found by ethical hackers that are not operating from within a company, But it's also true that most of the vulnerabilities are actually found by the operators themselves who are running those products. And that is indeed a good thing, and that's their job. So it's good to keep in mind that this kind of ethical hacking that happens is something that happens. And there are bug bounty platforms and so on. So it's not something that needs to be started up or something like that. But yeah, the bulk of security research and vulnerability work, of course, is done by the operators. And then generally, yeah, what should mention that coordinating across multiple parties is always an issue, especially when there's money at stake, and especially when people are from different communities. And very often, ethical hackers, they come from a specific culture, they have a specific way of talking, and then especially when you transpose that across borders and cultures, yeah, but the big challenge here is to deal with yeah, with those kind of communications problems, and especially when lawyers come into the room, of course, yeah, things what is common sense suddenly is no longer the easiest path. So, as a general remark to close the disclaimers, I think nobody really wants to have an unfriendly communication with a hacker, with an ethical hacker who also has a 0 day in his hands, and there's definitely a risk that messages are not understood clearly. Someone just wants some acknowledgement and a thank you note, and someone else thinks that a cyber attack is at hand and calls in the cavalry and the lawyers. And that easily escalates into a situation where the ethical hacker gives up and says, okay, those guys, let them be. A vulnerability does not get patched, and it becomes a very unfriendly experience for everyone. So I think that is where a lot of the member states that have vulnerability disclosure policies in place have started to put their emphasis. That it's much more about providing the oil and the processes and the good streamlining, so that people can find each other and work in good faith. Very briefly then on the state of play. So a couple of countries in the EU have implemented coordinated vulnerability disclosure policies. So these are like public policies where the country explains that certain vulnerability research or security research is allowed under certain conditions, right? And so just for the layman, it is fine to check if the door was unlocked, but it is not fine to then open the door, walk into the building, grab everything you can find and walk out again. So a similar example with an hospital, it is a good idea if you are concerned about security of a medical system to perhaps see if there's a weakness. But what is not good, of course, is if you exploit that weakness and then take down that system and hundreds of patients are without medical care. So the balancing act that countries are facing is that they want to kind of keep the good part of security research and then also put some rules in place so that we don't get all the risks and people take a lot of care when they do security research. Made some first steps there. They have implemented policies. So the Netherlands, the French, the Belgians, and the Lithuanians, they have advanced disclosure policies in place, and they have a lot of experience. They have different approaches, ranging from a national rule for everyone or to just an informal letter from the prosecutor that explains that certain cases will not be prosecuted. There's 4 countries that are at the verge of implementing a policy: Denmark, Germany, Latvia, and Portugal. And there is 19 countries that have no policy in place, that are either developing one, some are a bit further than others, or are still struggling. So some of the issues that they are faced with, of course, is criminal law is an issue. There was the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. There's the EU Directive on Attacks Against ICT Systems. So EU countries actually have to prosecute cybercrime and attacks against systems. So the question is, okay, how do we create exceptions for the good researchers that only try to improve systems? There are various other laws that create problems: copyright, data protection law, contract law, export control laws. And then once you start collecting vulnerabilities, some of the challenges are, for example, around receiving a lot of false positives. A lot of people, if, for example, you give a nice reward, a lot of people will send vulnerabilities to you just to get a t-shirt or a mug or something like that. So that's something that you have to deal with. So generally, when you start to set up a policy or a process for reporting vulnerabilities, you also need to have the right skills and resources on board to be able to triage all those cases, because there will be a lot of stuff that you have to go through, and not everything will be this great 0 day that will be patched and save the country. Generally, countries that have a policy in place, they say that it's really helpful to get a good connection with the security community. And this good connection helps prevent unfriendly encounters and so on, and really helps improve systems and networks. And it also gives a bit of an idea on which of the vendors of software are actually quite weak in their security processes. An important role of the government here, of course, is also to explain the concept of hacking or ethical hacking to non-technical audience like prosecutors and legal people and lawyers, and to clarify the roles where security researchers have to go to first to be able to follow the process correctly. So a bit of oil to streamline those overall processes. And then I am wrapping up, but I wanted to say that indeed, coming back to the discussion of this morning, the NIS2 proposal introduces this idea of an EU-wide framework for vulnerability disclosure. There are two separate topics there, and it's good to keep them separate. One is around how do we create safe harbor for the security researchers, and how do we deal with those cases. And then there's a second topic, which is for a subset of those cases, you might want to register and publish them in a public database for the future. At the moment, those registers and databases are all outside of the EU, and the NIS2 proposal asks ENISA to set up a register database for the EU. So those two are separate topics, but of course interlinked. And yeah, we're working with the on both of those topics. So one is how can we help member states set up those policies, and secondly, what is going to be the overall framework and what are the overall processes, and how are we going to create a database, and what, how is going to be the load sharing between the national CSIRTs, the CSIRT network, and ENISA, and also a little bit of thinking about what is after the register, because the register is there for a reason. People use that information. What kind of use do they make of the information? What should be in the database? What problems are we really trying to tackle with this overall framework? So I hope that in a nutshell explains a little bit our, where we are, what is the status in Europe, and what are some of the next steps this topic right now.
Thank you, Marnix. I have been taking notes, so I have at least 3 questions, but we'll keep them for the Q&A session. Yeah, not right now. So I would like now to pass the floor, the virtual floor, to Valérie, because he hails from the Belgian Cybersecurity Center, and you mentioned it, Marnix, just seconds ago, that Belgium is one of the 4 countries having introduced a fully fledged policy to guide in vulnerability disclosure. So Valérie, my question to you is, can you tell us more? How has the government agency for cybersecurity taken up on that challenge? What are the lessons learned so far? Tell us a bit more about your experience in implementing this first off. I have a few ideas about this because we've talked about it back at the time, but tell us more about how you came to that, and how it is, coming up now, a few months after. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, it has been quite a challenge. Actually, it all started with several parliamentary questions to the Prime Minister around ethical hackers, CVD policy, and as a legal officer, just freshly appointed, I received a question, and we had directly to start a project to analyze, consult. It took about 2 years actually to really have finalized version, which could be really adopted. So it took us time to really consult with the ethical hacker community in Belgium, different stakeholders, public, private, also a lot of not easy discussion with the public prosecutor office and other public authorities, which were a little bit afraid of what we could actually end up with guidance. So we had to really find a balance between the interests of security researcher, but also on the other hand, vendors, responsible organization, the IT security community, and find where the disclosure of a vulnerability could be a smart thing, and in some cases where it should stay confidential and avoid direct public disclosure in case that there is no solution or patch already implemented. And at the same time, try to be in the skin of researcher to understand his motivation, his want for recognitions. So we had to take all this into account, taking several references that were already there on the table with our Dutch colleague, with the study from the CEPS, also ENISA report and so on. I mean, the previous report that ENISA did a few years ago, and try to see what, as a national cybersecurity authority, we could actually have a role in this process. We thought that we could play a facilitating role, providing guidance and resources, clarifying the legal value of a CVD policy, at least at the Belgium level, and bug bounty program. In light the fact that according to accountability principle, if you adopt a CVD policy, it could actually be a proof of legal compliance to several IT security legal obligation according to the GDPR, NIS, the new Cybersecurity Act, or other civil or product liability. So it can actually really be something that is included in the compliance service that a company is putting in place. So what we did first is to develop guidance, so documentation. We had a guide with part 1 with good practices, part 2 with the legal aspect, the brochure example. So a sort of template that entity could use. Of course, they had to adapt to their own system and to make this template their own. But we try to facilitate as much as possible. To lead, of course, so we had to adopt our own CVD policy first before publishing a general CVD policy at the national level, include the requirements to adopt the CVD in the baseline security guideline. So in our security measure at the national level, included in cybersecurity strategy, and also support international activities around CVD in the cooperation group, NS, OSCE, OCD, GFC, and other international fora. After that, trying to stimulate the role, trying to support awareness raising activities with private and public partners, define the role as coordinator by default for the national CSIRTs, which could help actually the researcher and the vendor in their process, helping or giving a third party, trusted party, to ease the communication process or the issue. Also to avoid disproportionate action from researcher as well, or the fact that they go into public. And also to play a role as a SPOC for vulnerabilities, because in that process, if we are aware of important vulnerabilities that could be also affecting other critical entities, we can use our spear warning and inform those critical entities at national level or even in the EU through the CSET network about the information, technical information, which have been already anonymized from the researcher of the concerned entity, so that we can, have an open culture around the existence of vulnerabilities of CVD policies, and stimulate the information sharing around that. Then after that, that will be for the next step, and maybe to discuss later on. We have to think a little bit after that what we should really include in our legal security compliance. It's not only just having a CVD, but also to have a vulnerability management in place, and probably included in the new EU legislation, included the NIS2, and look after maybe a law proposal to create safe harbor for ethical hackers. One of this way could be to dedicate them or recognize them as digital whistleblower with some extent and under condition, which could be a sort of safe harbor, probably at national level, that can be acknowledged under certain condition. That's in a nutshell our approach and how we tackle this challenge in Belgium.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think we'll have the opportunity to get back to quite a few of the elements you put forward. I wanted now to give Kevin Gallerin the floor. Thank you for taking the time. I know that you hail from Singapore. So from a private sector perspective, because you are a private sector stakeholder and a specialist in vulnerability identification, can you tell us more about how your company contributes to coordinated vulnerability disclosure? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reina. So at YesReact, we are a global VDP on a bug bounty platform. So basically, we are working with organizations of all sizes in Europe, APAC, and even in the US to set up bug bounty, VDP, CVD. So the whole process. How we contribute, I would say we are contributing in three ways. The first one is really working with non-profit or public organization, lawmaker, to promote the benefits of VDP and CVD. So as we are working on day-to-day basis with company and security researcher, because we are both parts, our approach, we say, is very practical. So we do our best to help and participate in working group in Europe, but what I'm doing mostly it's in the APAC with financial organization like monetary regulator on how to really promote CVD and VDP. I would say another example is what we see with the NIS2 with CVD. It's something that's for us a very huge step on it's going in the right direction. It's type of things that we can reuse when we are discussing with counterpart in APAC. Of course, the NIS2, it will not solve everything, because the real question, as Marnik said before, it's you still have so many different laws, no real safe harbor for the security researcher. So it's a very complicated topic. So we will see how it will be adopted in practice. So that's basically the main question. So that was the first part, I would say, with lawmaker, what we are doing. The second part is really working with the community. From the bug bounty part, where we know the security researcher, we are working with them, but we are also contacted by other type of security researcher, but also really simple user who discover vulnerabilities. What's interesting here is people who want to report a vulnerability, even if most of them are security researchers, there are no typical profile on. We might have some students, or even really basic user who find something and want to report it to the organization, but they have absolutely no idea how to do it properly and responsibly. So, for example, for them, we created some tools, a browser extension that if you run a website will tell you, okay, this is who to contact, how to contact. And if no VDP is set up or we don't have information, we can redirect them to a website which is Zero Disclose, which is one of the websites which is not for profit. It's a platform to report vulnerability where everything is encrypted and the reporter select the cert you want to contact. And we never access anything on the message comes through Tor, so no one has access to anything except the cert and the security researcher. Because today, many people, I think, find vulnerability but don't want to report them because they are scared, even if they did nothing wrong. They might want to stay anonymous or others want to get fame. It really depends. Another part on our job with the community is really managing their expectation in terms of what a company can realistically do. Some might expect the vulnerability will be fixed in 2 hours, or they get, I would say, pissed off if they don't get response. So that's what we do with the community. We try really to educate. And the last part, it's, I would say, more day-to-day job. It's implementing efficient VDP and bug bounty with our clients. So for the VDP part, we start to create with them policy, helping them to define what they could realistically expect, what kind of safe harbor they are giving to the researcher, but to have a very clear communication channel on what they can expect themselves, but also what the reporter can expect. So we create the channel to handle the vulnerability, because it's not just receiving the vulnerability, it's how you will handle it from receiving it to the fix, ensuring traceability, integrity of the content. After, we also provide assessment of the vulnerability. So that's what mentioned earlier, triaging service to help to really identify the vulnerability and check if it's a false positive or not. Something which is also interesting when we discuss with company, it's even very mature companies still have a lot of misconception about VDP and CVD. Some might be totally scared. They will be flooded with reports, which is honestly never the case with a proper VDP. And we see also different behavior, like some want to ask researcher to focus on specific product, kind of free security research. Or even worse, some will say on their VDP, want to say, if they them to avoid that, that maybe someone will get a reward if they find something interesting, which really, if they start to encourage finder by giving any type of reward, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. Because when a researcher will find that they can, if they submit a vulnerability, yes, they might get a t-shirt or even a monetary reward, then the company gets flooded with report, with very low quality report, with people just trying to get their luck. And on top of that, because there is no rules in terms of what the reward can be and will be, the reward can always be discussed. Because of that, people think they are incited to look at the vulnerability, don't get the reward they want. And in the absence of I would say mutually pre-agreed rules, it's unfortunately might lead to irresponsible disclosure. So we also orient them, if they want an active approach, they should do bug bounty or type of things. But if they accept the passive approach that someone might find in good faith a vulnerability, they always should opt for the VDP.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, thank you. Again, I have a lot of notes and a lot of questions, but before we dive into that, I wanted to invite Laurent, so Laurent Bernard, who hails from the OECD. So delighted to have you with us today. Several months ago, you and your team released a really thorough and acclaimed report with policy recommendations in favor of vulnerability treatment, as the way you framed it. From where I stand, it was a significant move to raising further awareness among policymakers on the challenges around tackling vulnerabilities. And so to, kind of extend the perimeter in the discussion that we have today, can you tell us about your perspective and also the genesis of this work? Because you were from the OECD, meaning an international organization which concerns itself primarily with prosperity. So how can you tell us how you've come to tackle the issue of vulnerability treatment from your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. And I hope you hear me well. I had some microphone issues. Okay, sounds good. So, well, thank you. And thanks to CEPS and Lorenzo for inviting me to this panel. It's true that at the OECD, we've been working on vulnerability treatment of vulnerabilities more generally over the last 2 years. We have an analytical report that was launched in February this year. And actually, we have several analytical reports on this issue, but this work was supported by an informal expert group, a multi-stakeholder international group, and a number of people or institutions represented today, including you, Rena, participated in this. Yes, it has been an important area for us over the last 2 years, and we're continuing to work on this issue now with the development of an OECD Council recommendation on the treatment of digital security vulnerabilities. A recommendation is an international legal instrument with guidance for policymakers, and it reflects the OECD consensus on the matter. So it's a rather important process, and it's a very important commitment on the part of OECD countries. But I'll talk perhaps later about this, but I'd like to respond to your question. I'd like to tell you a little bit about not so much the process, but what we discovered during the process and during this analytical exercise. And at the beginning, we thought it would be relatively easy. We started with like a fresh mindset saying, well, we didn't really know the issue. So while it looks like a technical problem and the technical community has been working on this for many years, so our role here is mainly to inform policymakers about what has been going on and help bridge them with the technical community. We also thought that it's all about 0 days, and we need to focus the work on the responsibility of software makers, so-called vendors, and we'll come back to that perhaps later on, because they have a responsibility to develop these mitigations, these patches and updates. So once the vulnerabilities are reported to them, so that's mainly the core of the subject. And we thought also it's about the disclosure process. That's the core of the work. So all of this is about the relationship between the software makers and the vulnerability researchers, so the vendors and the ethical hackers, to use the terms everybody uses. And we also thought that governments can help, because this relationship is not so much a government relationship. It's something where governments is a neutral actor that can help the situation. They don't have much to do themselves, but they can put some oil into this and make it work better. And we found like that some of that is true. It's partially true, but it's not all about everything that I've just said. It's more complex. So this would be a simplistic view. And that's really a takeaway from the experts. They were in our process very useful. So the technical community and the governments who've participated into this, even the civil society, really helped. So we found that it's not just a technical problem. There are economic and social obstacles to make progress in this area. The incentives are misaligned, and there is a great report by ENISA on this, which was very helpful in our work. There are legal issues around the risk faced by vulnerability researchers. And again, I mean, there is more work now, but at the time there was the CEPS report, which was kind of avant-garde on this. And we heard from Marnix an update on what's going on in the EU. We realized that there are complex economic issues around the gray market for vulnerabilities, where vulnerabilities are traded, but not with the purpose of fixing them. And that's a real issue that destabilizes all the economics of this area. And we found also that there are cultural issues about vulnerabilities. And we heard from Kevin that there are misconceptions about this area. And they are broader, actually. They are broader. They go with actually the notion, the very basic notion of a vulnerability is something that scares people. And so that's probably at the core of the challenge ahead. We also found that it's not just about 0 days. It's not just about 0 days vulnerability researchers and the disclosure issue. It's broader than that. Of course, all of this is important, but developing the mitigation, avoiding issues around disclosure are key steps, but it's not sufficient. And if you take a public policy perspective, the objective of the public policy makers is not to address vulnerabilities. It's not to do CVDs, make sure that, no, it's to reduce the level of digital security risk, right? So if there is a mitigation and if the disclosure process goes very well, that's great, but the risk is not reduced. What you need is actually the mitigations to be implemented by all system owners who use the product or the software piece that was vulnerable in the first place. So it means that for policymakers, they need to take a more holistic approach than rather focus on CVD and again, which is a very important issue, and the 0 days. They need to go broader and consider the entire life cycle of the vulnerability, which is why we talk about vulnerability treatment, which includes that entire life cycle from the discovery to the implementation of the mitigation by all stakeholders, and including the CVD. And with that perspective, then we see that there are a number of concepts that don't really work, like the vendor concept, for example. It means that the system owners, so those who have to patch and implement the mitigation at the end of the process, are as important as the other stakeholders, and they need to be part of the conversation and in the scope of the policy. That's a very important aspect. And finally, we found that governments are not neutral in this area, contrary to what we thought at the beginning. They are sometimes, well, so they have a positive role, but they also are part of the problem. And here in our process, we were stepping on the sensitive part, probably the most sensitive part. And I already mentioned the gray market. We know that some governments are on that gray market purchasing vulnerabilities, so that's a source of complexity. And we also know that some governments make an offensive use of vulnerabilities, which is a situation which creates a trust challenge between the stakeholders, so whether it's the vulnerability researchers, the businesses, the system owners and others, and the government. So there is an institutional issue and a consistency, coherence issue, a challenge to be addressed by governments on this. So to go back to your question, why is the OECD working on this, and where do we come from? Well, we've been working on cybersecurity for many years, since the early 1990s, so it's not new for us. The relationship between cybersecurity and prosperity is at the core of what we do. But on this particular issue, we found that it's an economic and social issue, and it's also an international issue. The coordination often takes place across borders. The software value chains are global, and so coordination within the value chains are often international or need to be international. And also some countries are more advanced than others, which implies the need for sharing knowledge and experience across countries. So in fact, if I want to take a step back, and look at our process and give you a broader perspective, I would like to say that the fact that the OECD is looking at this, it's true, it's a more technical issue than what we were looking at in the past. And it means probably that there is an evolution among governments and among the stakeholders at the international level, recognizing that cybersecurity is not just a national security, international security, or a cybercrime issue, or even a very, very technical standards-oriented issue. It's also an economic and social issues, and policymakers and governments have a role to play to look at this from the economic and social perspective. So that's where we stand from. And I think I already spoke too much. So back to you, Rana.
Thank you, Laurent. It's never, too detailed and too much when it comes from you guys. So I kind of tried to make a summary of the different issues you have been raising, all of you. And there are three that kind of, come forward when I look at my notes. One of them is obviously the need for safe harbor for researchers. And what I'm hearing is that some member states are moving forward with narrowing down the approaches to provide such legal clarity, if you'd like to call it. So, because it is clearly recognized. I mean, we are past beyond the point where we needed to explain it is an obstacle to reporting vulnerabilities. So my question, perhaps to Marnix to start with, would be, how do you think your role as ENISA and also the NIS directive, the NIS2 directive, would help to provide that legal clarity? And would they, and what would ENISA's recommendation be to member states, to private sector on that topic? So floor is yours, Marnix. Yeah, great. We don't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Difficult question, of course, because it's a little bit out of our mandate, the legal issues. What we can do, of course, is help to explain what are the right conditions and the right rules under which security research can be done safely and should be considered fine and not be prosecuted and so on. We can help with terminology, also what Valerie was saying, and we can help explain what it means, explain the story to outsiders, maybe get a bit of the stigma around hacking away. The word is used so often in the wrong meaning. So that's something, for sure, where we can help. And finally, I also think that, also what Laurent was saying, to provide a little bit of the bigger picture. That is, I think, our job, not to get dragged into saying that the bug bounties are everything and that European security researchers have to bicycle around the city like in the gig economy, trying to get a bit of payment for hours and days and weeks of hard work. We should be mindful of the bigger picture and understand that vendors are the ones providing the software. They are the ones that need to improve their software development practices and ensure that there are no vulnerabilities. And if there are vulnerabilities, that they get patched automatically so that we can relax and sit back and enjoy without having to deal with all those issues, which are essentially at the bottom problems with the vendor. And not so that I think that is perhaps a little bit our role, explaining things. We will also set up a register, of course, those things, so there will be a little bit of practical stuff. But I don't know what to add there. But the legal aspects, Valerie from just spoke had an interesting suggestion. I believe they wanted to clarify some of the legal immunity aspects of our law.
Yeah, that was my other question. Valerie, can you tell us more about how you are approaching this? Because thank you, Marnix. Because the whole whistleblower legal status, I mean, we've had that discussion before, right? Depending on the member state and depending on the legal framework you were talking about, it can be extremely narrowly defined. So can you tell us more about how you're approaching this without necessarily getting in the nitty-gritty details, but basically how you are expanding on that status and how you are doing that all by keeping, you know, the legal value of a whistleblower status that is not a ethical hacker reporting vulnerability to a vendor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heina and Marnix. I can see the ball coming right at me, because we actually really dive into that idea, because we were also consulted at the national level about the implementation of the EU directive on whistleblowing and whistleblower. Which also include a part related to violation of the NRS directive or privacy issues. But then the directive, it's really linked with the notion of information that you are aware in the context of your work. So it's work related, and with confidential information you gather during your work activities. But if we take, as Marnix said, a bigger picture, we can see that whistleblowing, it's not only for people that are linked with the work. Of course, it is for the EU directive, but each member states can take a wider approach in the national implementation. And one of our proposals at national level, which we'll see how it will end up and how it will at the political level be judged. But we had come forward saying that if under certain condition, for example, if we can prove or the researcher can prove that he has belief on the existence of a potential vulnerability, that it has no malicious or fraudulent intention, that he has informed the national CSIRT and the concerned organization, that he can prove that his action has stayed proportionate to the fact that he wanted to improve the IT security and to find vulnerability. And also that he doesn't publicly disclose the information that he gathered during his research without the agreement of the national CSIRT. And in that context, and what we will try to use, it's the implementation of the EU directive on whistleblowers to include one chapter which will a little bit go beyond the scope of that directive, but find protection, a sort of protection from what we can call digital whistleblower or ethical hackers. But then that is an approach that we can do at national level, because if we look around the criminal legislation, it's still included at national level for each member state. So the EU cannot, as such, impose obligation or safe harbor, but they can give, as an ESA, a good practice, good ideas, exchange good ideas, or judicial cooperation that could maybe help go in that direction. But of course, it's always a question of balance, because you don't want also any researcher to use that as a fake intention and actually go and check all your IT system and then just say, well, I was just an ethical hacker. But if you really put strict controls, of course, it will bring more work or loads for national CSIRT. So that is also to take into account. But as a coordinator, I think it would be probably a good work that is gathering this information on vulnerabilities. But it will include filters and a lot of process and resources in it also. So not easy.
Yeah, that's true. Let me do something. Kevin, can you on the spot, tell us what your feeling is about that sort of approach? I mean, what Valérie just described resembles what the Dutch have been doing, this decentralized approach, but where you have a very clear guideline and decision tree, if you like, that qualifies each report and the liability that goes, that lies with the hacker, with the ethical hacker that's reporting the vulnerability. Can you tell us, like, from your perspective, you were telling us about the confusions, about all the difficulties that we can have with people reporting vulnerabilities, like very briefly and on the spot. What do you think of that proposed approach?
On the spot, it's quite hard, I would say, to have a very meaningful. The real question is, it's if you still want to centralize, like, okay, let's send everything to a CERT, it will be quite complicated because people will not be able to identify it by themselves. What's more important, it's really pushing in terms of legislation on it's quite clear. The example I give all the time, it's you can have a safe harbor, but you need to be clear on what you expect. The good faith is very, very important. It's something that can be demonstrated. If you discover a vulnerability, it doesn't mean that you will have to look at all the data from the system. If you spot something, you report it immediately. There is no balance. After, some people, they don't even realize what they are doing, and this is where the lines are quite blurred. But the way they will report it, the timeline, all this, it's go, as Marnik said before, it's not just legal, it's more about logical thing. So I really don't know how it can be done properly, I would say.
You mean we don't have a crystal ball as of now?
No.
Such a disappointment. No, thank you. What I'm hearing from also coming in your introductory remarks and now with those Q&A discussions is the need to define roles and responsibilities and also to basically come up with very clear frameworks of transparency and accountability. We've heard about the need, for vendors to fix. Laurent, I'm turning to you. You said a few things that we've seen in those discussions about, gray markets, about public disclosure from vendors, and the more we think about this whole discussion about vulnerabilities is if we start thinking about what makes the value of a vulnerability is the time it remains unpatched, right? So the more quickly I fix it, the lower its value, right? So can you tell us more from your high level, if you like, perspective, where you are working with member states which are at the time member of the EU and the OECD, and you're also working with different stakeholders and communities. How is that transparency and accountability thing coming around? Because what you described is a process. It's a process of treatment of vulnerabilities, of which disclosure is just, well, quote unquote, the first step, which has its own issues. But, going beyond that, how do we implement those transparency and accountability responsibilities that go with vulnerability treatment?
Okay, well, that's an easy question. Thank you so much for asking it. Well, I think we need to take a step back and think about the big picture. I mean, not necessarily the very high level big picture, but the the vulnerability life cycle on the one hand. So as I said, not just the disclosure or the discovery or the development of the mitigation, the relationship with the researcher, but the whole picture, including the system owners who have to implement the security updates or the patches or whatever mitigation, and also the public disclosure where it's necessary at the end. If we take that step back, then we see, as I said, it's more complex and there are more actors or more different categories of actors than we thought at the beginning. And so we can have okay, it's a little bit more complex, but we have a richer picture of what can be done. And I think that's where we should start from, actually. It's a point that was made by one of our member countries, actually, in the process, that if you look at this in a narrow way, it's not going to work. And there will be more confusion than what you had when you started. So I think, as Rana, you used the expression clarify the responsibilities. I think that's the very first step. You know, if it's not clear who is responsible for what or who should be responsible for what, it's going to be complicated. And here we have clearly a number of actors identified. If we put the bad guys aside, who are also part of the equation, if we go to the economics of the vulnerabilities, if you put them aside, and we have what we call vendors, for example, don't work, you know, because the term vendor just doesn't work when you think about a vulnerability reported to a business or an organization which is not a vendor of a software product. So the terminology itself has to be looked at. I think it's a historical term coming from the technical community, which makes sense in some context, but if you consider also the components in the products, you know, the fact that the vulnerability may be in a component, then it's not really the vendor who can patch the component. So all of this is more complicated than it looks. And so if you want to have the clear picture of the accountability and the transparency, first you need to understand what's the situation. And so who are the actors, who's responsible for what, what's the life cycle of the vulnerability, things that we've tried to map in our work and that we're trying to reflect in the draft recommendation that we are currently developing, where we try to identify a number of areas where policymakers can change the situation, improve the situation, recognizing the complexities in some spaces. But there are many areas where progress can be made. So I'm sure I've not responded to your question, but at least hopefully that's useful.
No, I'm very disappointed. No, no, I'm kidding. Obviously, I mean, it's impossible to provide, you know, a simple answer to such a question, and a definite one at that. So I'm mindful of the time, and I see we have 2 minutes left to the end. So as a conclusion, I want one takeaway message from you guys, but something that is short enough for you to tweet, you know. But imagine we were in 2030. So for like 10 years from now, what would you like to tweet that reflects, you know, the state of affairs in 10 years in relation to vulnerability? One sentence. Marnix?
Well, time to start walking the talk, I would say.
Great. Where is Valérie?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yep.
I would say from a legal point of view, I would say that coordinated vulnerability policy and vulnerability management should be requirements by default. So a practice by default.
Thank you. Kevin?
I think this one was very good. The other one might be it's 2030 and still some companies think it's a good idea to give reward on a VDP.
I see where you're coming from. And Laurent, your tweets in 2030?
Well, I think hopefully by 2030 we would have changed the culture around vulnerabilities. So I will have a tweet saying, for the first time, a company who threatened a vulnerability researcher got fined. I think that's pushing, you know, as far as possible the the balance and saying, well, now those who actually create legal risk, well, wrongful legal risk for researchers should pay something. They should have a cost for doing that because they are increasing the risk for all. So perhaps by 2030 we may be there and have them also think twice before they do it.
Yeah, that was part of my 1,000 questions to you today, but we unfortunately don't have 4 more hours. So as all good things, our discussion is coming to an end. Thank you once again to everyone who participated, who made it possible, to you for your openness, to CEPS for hosting, and to all of you for sticking with us today in that quite technical discussion. So as a reminder, this roundtable is available on the CEPS YouTube channel if you want to rewatch it. Enjoy your lunch, stay safe, and let's keep the discussion going. And Lorenzo, over to you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Raina. Thank you very much for this section. Very interesting. And so we are halfway through in our summit. Today we had we cover a lot of ground, and I think there is also a very positive message coming out that although the threats are increasing, but also overall the police becoming better equipped, to handle so many situations. I invite all of you tomorrow to continue to stay tuned with us because we look at very interesting issues tomorrow. Especially we'll have 3 great keynote speakers, Stasha Novak from the Council, Jerome Billois from Wavestone, and Pedro Norton Barbosa from CEO Multicert and the Cybersecurity Director of CEPS. It's a payment system company. And then we look at quantum computing and the global cybersecurity governance role. Tomorrow we'll start at 9:45. Okay. So thank you very much. Stay tuned, and you should have received already. You will receive by today the link for tomorrow connection on WebEx. Okay. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I would like also to thank Francesca Cecchini for all her technical help. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorenzo.
Francesca, can you stay just a few seconds?